And then ask for any comments.
Yep, right, and then I think that maybe indicating that the general legal session is going to be after that.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session of the Joint Board of the Colorado River Water Conservation District and the Enterprise Fund. We're reconvening after coming out of executive session. We are going to move our general counsel's report to be after our discussions with the director of the Water Conservation Board. But first, I'd like to, number one, have folks introduce themselves and say who they're with. Starting at the back, Angie?
Sure, Angie Fowler from SGM, also representing Roundtable Interest. Good afternoon, Maria Pastore, Colorado Springs Utilities.
Steve Anderson, manager of the Putnam Valley Water Users.
Laura Span, the Southwestern Water Conservation District.
Becky Mitchell, Water Conservation Board.
Amy Ostick, also CRWCD.
Lynn Leonia, Colorado Attorney General's Office.
Heather Sackett, Aspen Journalism.
We had some stranger just walk in a red shirt.
You're right, too, stranger.
Okay, okay. Well, welcome everybody. And then next item is there anybody here that wants to address the board on an item that's not on the agenda? Hearing none, I guess our next order of business is to hear from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Ms. Mitchell, staff. And
Well, if I can just take an opportunity here, I want to congratulate on behalf of the district, Director Mitchell, who is now also coming to us as Commissioner Mitchell.
I was
Colorado.
going to do that. I was going to do that. You jumped in there.
Just want to congratulate Director Mitchell, Commissioner Mitchell, on being Colorado's commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission. We all look forward to working with you closely on that and these interesting times that we live in. So.
Thank you for
And
that.
about, 11 or 12 years ago, you just dodged a bullet for working for me? You left HDR right before I came there.
Yeah, that's a longer story.
You were lucky.
Well, and I think, Andy, thanks for mentioning that recent appointment. That makes these types of meetings even more important.
Yeah.
Last time I was here, I talked about us having more communication and open dialogue, and that was even previous to this new role. And so stepping into this commissioner role along with the director of the CWCB role, these dialogues are going to be even more important. And so I'm hoping that this won't be the last time I get an invite to be here. And I'm hoping that there'll be many more of these to come. I don't want to be at every one of your meetings, but I'd like to be at some of your meetings.
We only meet 4 times a year, so you're welcome to come. Yeah.
Sometimes they coincide with mine, so that makes it difficult. But I hope that Director Mueller will mention that the lines of communication have already opened significantly in this new role, and that I rely not only on the board here, but Andy and the staff at the River District to educate me as I move forward with this. And so I'm hoping that the board continues to support them in that role, and it's already been incredibly helpful to me. So
I'd like to emphasize our long-term relationship with CWCB and UCRC, and being on, the legal and engineering committees and work groups that UCRC has, as well as the work groups on the Salinity Control Forum. We have a long history of dedicating our staff to being involved at those state and interstate issues.
and thank you for bringing that up. It is an appropriate time for me to probably mention that I asked John Courier to be on the engineering subcommittee for the UCRC. That's there wasn't a broadcast out about it, but it is that is a recent change that I made as of last week. Not in anticipation of coming here, not meandering at all.
So we gotta do that before.
But John and I had been in conversations about that previously and felt like it was incredibly important to have his expertise as we're looking at some of the engineering efforts that have to go on the intrastate level. So if you weren't already aware of that, I don't know if that was discussed but I wanted to let you all know that. So
We appreciate that. know, we are very interested in the activities of the commission and the Salinity Control Forum.
Well, and I appreciate the support that you guys give to the staff to be able to do that. I know there's a fiscal cost or a cost to that, and I know that participation, it has some burdens, but it also has great benefit. And so I'm glad to see you all so supportive. I want to spend just a few minutes talking a little bit about some of the things on the interstate level, but then I also wanted to make sure that you all had time to hear where we are with demand management. Just with the work groups, much of you are either on a work group or participating in some way, shape, or form, or the staff is. And so maybe one or two of you know what's happening on one or two groups, but we want to let you know what's happening with all the groups that have met so far, just at a very high level. I don't want to go into the details of the drought contingency plan because you guys know that as well as I do. For sure, but I want to spend a little bit of time on letting you know where we are on the interstate level. So, as Andy mentioned, it's being recently appointed. There's some exciting times, and some times that we're really going to have to show some leadership in Colorado, and I think this is the time for that, and we are set up to do that, and coming off of the drought contingency plans and looking at what we've learned in even just the first few months of those, and puts us in a good position to be able to lead. And the lower basin is already taking cuts. We've seen what they've had to do this summer, and we have already learned so much from the work on the demand management. But as we look towards the future and what we have to do with all of the basin states, it is critical and important that we in Colorado speak with one unified voice. I see what's happening in the lower basin states, California, Arizona, Nevada. They are working to have a unified voice within their state. We need to be able to do that in Colorado. And so it is twofold being here. It is to have open lines of communication, but it's also to make sure that I'm hearing you so that we can speak with one voice. And so far, everybody's been really open to that and recognizes the need for that. As we look towards the negotiations of the guidelines moving forward, that is going to be critical.
And on the demand management aspect, on the groups, I know it was a bit contentious, but we appreciate the Water Conservation Board opening up that process and making it more transparent, because anything that is going to happen on that is going to have to be transparent to be accepted.
Well, and thank you for bringing that up also. We learn a little from our success, and we learn more from our failures and where we could have done things differently. And I think that's true with everything in life. And so in that instance, I wish it had gone down differently on both sides, to be perfectly honest. I'm not going to say that it was any one side or one issue, but I hope that moving forward that we learned from that. I learned from that significantly. I think there were a lot of people that learned from that. And we are in a time where we're being very cautious because we know what's at stake. And that was part of the drive. But I think there is a time and place, and so I thank you for helping us, and the conversations that we had with members of the board and staff really helped drive my direction in terms of where I went with that, and people were watching, and the other basin states were watching as we went through that, and so how we handle things in the future, I hope is shaped by what we learned from that. So that is something to think about as we move forward. And I think we're going to get a better process because of it. Speaking of the demand management groups, I get to let you know that the law and policy group, I think, has finally been scheduled. So that was giving you some updates on the demand management work groups that have happened thus far, but also to let you know that I can't give you an update on the law and policy group because they haven't met yet. But the people that are on that group, some sitting in this room, are very busy. And so the first date that was available is December 19th, ruining my Christmas break. So, but also ruining others. So that's I'm fine with that. But that first meeting will take place at that point in time. And I think one of the purposes of that group was to really respond out of what came from the other demand management work groups and see what could be done on the law and policy side, or maybe what needed to be looked at. And so I think the timing, while it's a little bit lagging, is also a better situation moving forward. So like I mentioned, the lower basin states are already taking some cuts, and we're seeing the benefit of that. But as we look at demand management, we're hoping that we can learn more than just about demand management within the state, but looking forward, taking those lessons into our discussions with the other basin states. I'm going to let Amy talk about some of the demand management work groups and what's happening, the work plan, what the year looks like thus far, and looking forward. And then I was told that this could be more of a dialogue if you guys had any questions. I know there may be some other things that we want to talk about. I'm open to all of that. I reserve the right to get back to you if there's something that is not at the forefront of my brain. But we're going to keep it as brief on this part, and then hopefully open up to any dialogue that you guys are.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. So I think I've met a lot of you, but for those I haven't met, I'm Amy Ostick with CRWCD for 3 weeks now. Before that, I was at the Colorado Attorney General's office, so I've been doing Colorado River stuff for a while now, and I'm really excited to be getting into this next chapter. So like Becky said, our goal today is really to make this a dialogue. So I'm going to keep this brief, but also if at any point you want to interrupt me and ask a question or just talk about something more, absolutely feel free to do that. And I'll also let these guys know to jump in at any point if I'm missing anything or if they can answer your questions better than I can. So I'm hoping to talk a bit more substantively about the work groups and what they've been looking at. First, I did just want to mention, because you have not heard enough about DCP yet, that there are two other elements of the Upper Basin DCP. There are the reservoir operations, and that's all I'm going to say about that. And there's also weather modification, and it looks like we're getting some additional funding there, and we want to thank you all for your support with that. So we have a strong weather mod program, and we hope it only continues to get better. One thing to remember when thinking about weather mod and demand management is that weather modification creates what we call system water. Excuse me. So that water essentially benefits the entire Colorado River system. It's not water that we can use in the Upper Basin for compact compliance purposes. And that's really where a potential demand management program would come in, is creating that water that helps us in the Upper Basin really protect our existing uses, protect our compact compliance, and put us in a better position than we might otherwise be for compact purposes. So I just wanted to make that quick distinction and also say that thank you for the weather mod support. So I feel like at every demand management talk we go through these reminders or these things to keep in mind when we talk about demand management. One is that it's temporary, voluntary, and compensated. I'm sure none of you have ever heard that before, but I have to say it. And I also just want to kind of make clear again that it's not a foregone conclusion. So if we were to actually set up a demand management program in the Upper Basin, there are a lot of hoops that we need to jump through. There's a lot of analysis that would have to be done. And keep in mind that the other Upper Basin states are all doing the same type of analysis we are. So every single Upper Basin state would have to come back to the table at the CRC and say, after our stakeholder engagement, after this long process of looking at all these issues, we've decided it makes sense for our state. And only if every Upper Basin state does that can we actually even look at setting up a demand management program. So at this point, we're not even talking about setting that up. It's going to be a long time till we get there. What we're really focused on right now with these work groups is just looking at kind of the big picture threshold issues. So what are the things we need to think about? What are the impacts that we might have to agriculture? How can we maybe mitigate some of those? Does it even make sense to do this? Or do we just want to say, it doesn't make sense for Colorado to have a demand management program? we have the right to do that at the end of this. Every state essentially has a veto. So that's something to keep in mind. This is only the very initial stage of looking at whether it would be feasible for the state. So with that being said, trying to think if there are any more obligatory reminders that I need to make about demand management. So for Colorado's part in that Upper Basin feasibility investigation, of course, we have the 2019 work plan that the board adopted, and that is three-pronged. So we are working on carrying out all of those elements right now. One of them was to conduct workshops about demand management. We held the first one in Steamboat in August, I think. And we look forward to scheduling the next one. And those are kind of, the idea there is like a big kind of public meeting where we can report out what is happening at the work group level, people can come with feedback, and we really hope to make those kind of listening sessions so that we can come and really hear what people's concerns are. Keep in mind the work groups are open to the public, so at any point people can feed input into those, but also feel free to come to the workshops if that works for you. And of course, another prong of the work plan is just this ongoing outreach. So we want to make ourselves as available as we possibly can. I know Becky's schedule is super, super busy, but please feel free to reach out to me or any CWCD staff at any time if you'd like. I'm more than happy to come back here and talk to you more about it as the process goes forward. So please just let us know what you need as far as that goes. And I'm perfectly available. So the third prong, and the area where I'm really going to spend a little bit more talking, is this creation of the work groups. And the idea here was to create groups of kind of subject matter experts, people who have some experience or expertise on Colorado River issues, in these 9 different areas, and kind of just get them in a room to start talking about these big picture questions and issues that would need to be figured out before we decide if a demand management program is right for Colorado. So they're really kind of framing these issues for board consideration. So we've gotten the process all kicked off. It took a little bit to get off the ground. We had a few discussions, letting you know about what they would all look like. But I think almost all the work groups have met at least once. I think actually none of them have met more than once, but the second round of meetings I think is coming up in the next couple of weeks for a few of them. We do have, I know, at least one report out up on the website now. I think there are a couple others that are under review by the work group members, and then we'll get those up. And the idea there is just after every meeting, the work groups are going to kind of report out on what they talked about, and that's publicly available at the website. But again, I just want to reiterate that you guys can come to any of these meetings. There's an opportunity for public input, and what I've also been trying to do is create an opportunity at the beginning of each meeting to go over the public input we've received since that last meeting, and really talk about what are people talking about with respect to this work group. What are the issues that people have brought to us that we need to make sure we're talking about?
And can I interject?
Go ahead,
Sorry,
yeah.
and I think that's especially helpful when you look at a group like this, that it's such a broad geographical range and range of interests, that when you all hear something from your constituents or from people in your areas, it's important for us to hear that as soon as possible. So whether it comes from you or in some fashion, or even just through email, you don't necessarily have to be in there in person, but if there's some way that we could hear what you're hearing, hear what the concerns are out there, so that we can try to address them earlier on. And we're learning from all of those concerns. We're learning from all of that as we move forward, and they're helpful to hear earlier rather than later.
And we do have a demand management email address set up. It's demandmanagement@state.co.us. So anytime you have just random thoughts or midnight musings about demand management, feel free to send them to that address, not to mine.
Nice intuitive.
Unfortunately, one thing we found is when there's not a name associated with it, people are sometimes a little more liberal with their language and words. So sometimes with that not being associated.
Demand management@state.co.us. Yep, and we can.
Just like all your other CWC addresses.
Right. Yep. So I'm just going to provide kind of a brief synopsis of the work groups that have met so far and kind of what they've talked about. One thing I'll note at the outset is there have been some kind of themes that cut across all of these work groups. One is this question of equity that I think you all are pretty familiar with. What does that look like in these various discussions? What does that look like for the state as a whole? So the work groups are kind of all chewing on that question within the context of their own subject area. Another kind of concern or thought is that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's been a lot of work done on a lot of these issues. A lot of you are familiar with the System Conservation Pilot Program and studies related to that, the Secondary Economic Impact Study that the Water Bank Work Group is working on. There's a lot of research and a lot of resources out there. So a lot of groups want to make sure that we're not just redoing those things. So most groups have said that a lit review would be really helpful. And we've talked about getting a contractor who can do that and potentially other work for the work groups. We have an RFP that will be out very soon. So hopefully we can get started on some of that work. The work groups can look more into that. So the funding work group, I think, was the first to meet. And as you can imagine, they talked about potential funding sources for a demand management program and the pros and cons of each of those various sources and what that might look like and how it's administered and things like that. And again, like the other groups, they thought that a lit review would be really helpful because we've done a number of, or a few anyway, pilot programs, and we have various funding opportunities for those. So how could that be informative? How would this be different? Stuff like that. And then the economics and local government group also met shortly after that. And I think a lot of the discussion there was focused on how do we make this program a net positive? One thing to remember about demand management is, again, this is not a foregone conclusion. So if we want to make a program, let's make it work for all of us. Let's make it work for the West Slope. Let's make it work for everyone in the state. If we're going to set it up, why would we set it up if it's not beneficial for us, right? So that group is kind of looking at how do we make sure that this is a positive impact, not only for the individuals participating, but how do we make sure we're mitigating any adverse impacts that we have on local communities, things like that. And again, they thought that a literature review would be beneficial. And one thing that I think they noted is the secondary economic impact study coming out of the Water Bank Work Group. They're looking at a lot of these similar issues. So to the extent that we can kind of look at that and use that information, I think it would be helpful. Environmental considerations, they kind of looked at how can we design a program that has environmental benefits? So is there any way that we can work with the timing or things like that to kind of make it have multiple beneficial effects across different sectors? Again, literature review and kind of an understanding of what tools we might already have in place to analyze environmental benefits of an existing program or something like that. The agricultural impacts group, I wasn't actually at this meeting. I think they, again, focus largely on this net positive idea. So how do we make sure that this is actually beneficial for the communities that it could impact, or at least to make sure there aren't negative impacts, and how do we mitigate those to the extent there are? And also they talked a little bit about the definition of the terms that we're using, like voluntary, temporary, and compensated. What exactly does that look like? How do we define those things? And also the equity question. And I know that I said that kind of cut across all the work groups, but I think the Ag Impacts Group especially was focused on that question at their first meeting. Then the Education Outreach Group, which I also was not at, but I think was a lot of fun. And this is really focused on how do we effectively communicate all of this with our stakeholders and water users and everyone across the state. How do we get the message out? How do we talk about it? How do we make sure we're all on the same page? And I think that there is a lot of work to be done there. Monitoring and verification. So they took a slightly different approach, whereas most of the other work groups kind of started with a discussion, kind of an open discussion about these issues. They kind of took a step back and said, you know what, there are a lot of other pilot programs and programs that have been in place. Let's look a little bit at how they have done monitoring and verification, how that would be used. So they did a series of presentations focused partly, at least, on the system conservation pilot program and a few other things. So I think that's everyone who has met so far. Like I said, we have a couple other meetings coming up in the next few weeks.
The environmental considerations.
Yep,
They did, yep. So and they were focused largely on looking at how we can set up a program or encourage projects that might have environmental benefits, and what mechanisms there might be to evaluate that are already out there somewhere.
And some of those discussions are beyond demand management. I mean, they're not just about demand management, they're about Colorado's water future and what that looks like and how to be a part of that. So it's beyond just demand management discussions sometimes.
And how about the administration?
They're meeting November 18th.
Okay. So they haven't met yet, but they will be.
Nope, but they will be.
And the law and policy group is set to meet December 19th, I think. If you haven't received an email from
We
Karen.
did just this morning.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, yeah, the next things that are really coming up with demand management are this next round of meetings. We'll have the RFP getting out soon. And we're going to continue to do this kind of stuff. So if there are events that you guys know of that would be beneficial for us to come speak at or, let us know. So that will just be an ongoing effort. And at this point, I think, unless there's anything I'm missing.
We know there's some discussions at the Colorado Basin Roundtable, and so I think we'll probably be trying to take a more active role and participating in that to make sure that we're available for any of those discussions.
Okay. Mr. Okropeska?
Well, thank you, Amy, for that information. I wanted to return for just a moment to augmentation. We really appreciate, I certainly appreciate the commitment, the renewed commitment that the state has made to weather modification. I believe there's a lot more potential in the state for more weather modification projects. I'm told that there is geography where it's believed that we could do a lot more good with that. So please don't be shy about sharing with us additional needs as the opportunities for expansion show themselves and the state begins to address those. I also wanted to talk for a moment about the other half of augmentation, and that is management of invasive hydrophilic plant and tree species. And of course, the big ones are tamarisk, Russian olive, and to maybe a lesser degree, Chinese elms. There's some very good projects going on up and down the river system from Colorado all the way down to California, but they're very small segments of the river system or its tributaries. A lot of good could be done by expanding these efforts to more of a landscape scale of activity. There's not a farmer or a rancher that turns their water loose in the ditch in the springtime without first cleaning out those ditches through burning, the use of herbicides, and the use of mechanical equipment. And those are also tools that all would be employed or could be employed for landscape scale phreatophyte control. In my view, personally, there's just not enough investment going on there. But both phreatophyte control and weather modification are the only part of DCP that actually results in more wet water in the river system and its tributaries. So augmentation is a great alternative to demand management, and whether the state of Colorado goes forward with demand management or not, we still have those augmentation tools at hand and should engage in them enthusiastically.
Well, and I think you bring up some very important points, and I think we've seen more financial contribution in terms of weather mod. And so we see that there are people that are interested in it and seeing it as a viable way forward in terms of augmentation. And then just to highlight something, and I have to throw this out, but the water plan did mention the invasive species. As we look at the recovery programs, and I'm very familiar with the Platte River Recovery Program because I've worked on that extensively, and the phreatophytes and the phragmites is the issue there and creates whole choke points and losses of water. And so we mentioned that in the water plan. That is an area of focus, and we know that more money needs to be put to that and more interest needs to be put to that. And we're looking at, as we move forward, I think projects that incorporate that in areas where it is of concern and you look at it on a broad landscape basis will be something that will have to have some additional focus. And so, our role in the state is we are facilitators and supporters when it comes to projects, but those really, the role has been up to this point, and I see it continuing in this way primarily, is that those projects come from a local level, and we try to support, especially when they're consistent with the goals of Colorado's water plan, and that is one of the goals within there, is to look at those kind of issues.
Yeah, there's a lot being done at the local level, but I believe expanding our partnerships with the other 6 basin states is going to be necessary to really tackle invasive species up and down the river system in a meaningful way.
One thing, if I can just note, kind of to your second point there, or the second point that you made, about it potentially serving as kind of an alternative to demand management. I guess the way I've been kind of thinking about the DCP and all the tools it gives us is that they all are they have different end games. And the water that could potentially be created can be used for different things. So with weather modification, that water would be created as system water. So in other words, under the current, the 07 guidelines, if we do create that water, it could flow down to the lower basin. And if the demand management water, pursuant to the demand management storage agreement as part of the DCP, is invisible to those 07 guidelines. So it really can only be used for our purposes. That's kind of our safety net, and that's our guard when it comes to, a potential involuntary curtailment. So that water would just kind of serve a different purpose. It would be a level of protection for the upper basin rather than just creating system water, which is also great. I just want to clarify that they would those pools would play different roles.
Yeah, we get credit for system water towards our lower basin obligation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If I can, Amy, you hit on a good point, and I wonder if you and Lane and Becky could elaborate a little bit on compact compliance, right? That's really what the demand management agreement, storage agreement really is about. There's a lot of discussion, depending on who you ask, what compact compliance means. Can you help explain to our board the way you look at it or your agencies look at what compact compliance is for demand management?
All right, well, let me start with compact compliance. I mean, there's a lot there. How long do you have? Right. So, I'm going to do my best. So compact compliance, right, I mean, that's not the easiest decision to be made, right? So the lower basin is going to make some sort of an allegation or a claim that their $75 million over 10 consecutive years at Lee Ferry has not been met. So once they make that allegation, then the Upper Colorado River Commission would begin to assess whether or not that allegation was legitimate and has merit, and if so, they would then begin to investigate by how much that flow was short, how much we are out of compliance, and then which states and by how much in each one of those states pursuant to the Upper Colorado River Basin Compact. So there is a lot that just at the very outset, under the 2 compacts that we have now, that would have to be satisfied before we would ever get to actual complying with some request made by the lower basin to be determined by the Upper Colorado River Commission, and then eventually enforced within Colorado, within Wyoming, within Utah, based on a finding by the UCRC. So, and I think that there would, before all of that, or concurrent with all of that, there would then be a lot of discussion about what and who would need to be subject to such a curtailment. The Colorado River Compact references present perfected rights. What does that mean? Nobody knows. It's never been defined. So there would be a lot of discussion about that. Obviously, in Colorado, right, we have rights that are conditional. We have rights that are absolute. Where do you have a postponement doctrine that deals with original adjudications and versus later adjudications? So where would that fall for Colorado? So there would be decisions that would need to be made both intrastate and interstate with regard to compact compliance. Demand, yeah.
Yeah, and really my question was just, I think our board, oddly enough, has heard Peter, myself, others say exactly what you just said, so
Oh,
I
good.
totally
That's
agree.
always
Yeah, no, but I think the question that's looming is this demand management, if we're gonna reduce our consumptive use throughout the state in the Colorado, for Colorado River water users, and we put it in the storage account, and the agreement says it's gonna be used for compact compliance. What does that mean to you at the state, and what should we be interpreting that to mean? How do we know that water is, for instance, not primarily being used to support the power pool, or to primarily being used to support one use that might be deemed critical over, say, Mark Kaplan's farm? How does one know what that water, when we talk about compact compliance, we view that, and I think I've heard you all say this, is a proactive avoidance of the curtailment situation. So what is it that water gets used for in that circumstance in the demand management storage account?
So, I mean, the idea under the demand management storage agreement is that it would be utilized only to ensure our flow at Lee Ferry does not drop below that 75 and 10. It is a second line of defense after the drought response operations agreement. So it is supposed to be clearly distinguished from system water and this compact compliance concept. Now, whether or not that storage pool that makes up that demand management amount that is invisible to the lower basin, is invisible to releases made under the 2007 interim guidelines, is then also ancillary propping up critical elevations at Lake Powell. Sure, that happens. That's not its primary focus. So now, are we going to trace Director Catlin's drop of water all the way from his farm into Lake Powell and color that Director Catlin's water for release for compact compliance purposes? Most likely, I don't know the answer to that question. Most likely not. But that's something that we would have to work through as a part of, are we coloring water in Lake Powell, Wyoming's water, Colorado's water? These are questions that have yet to be determined and are not laid out under the terms of the demand management storage agreement. But there is a distinction, and I think Amy was really, really trying to emphasize that it is not intended to prop up and necessarily maintain the critical, minimum power pool. If it happens to do that while it's there, that's helpful for everyone. We all rely on those hydropower revenues extensively for O&M on all of those units and ESA compliance, and so we really like, there's some good benefits there. But that's not what it's intended to do.
And those of us who were at our seminar in Grand Junction a few weeks ago, all heard Ann Castle talk about this, and one of the comments that she made was that 500,000 acre-feet in Lake Powell isn't nearly enough. And I think we are talking about really bending over backwards to do something here in terms of just 500,000 acre-feet to acquire that amount of water delivered to Lake Powell. And yet we are, and have been for close to the last 20 years, delivering on the average 750,000 acre-feet per year to the lower basin over and above 8.23, not just over and above 7.5 million. So, you know, what we're doing with the demand management, are we also evaluating whether or not we should even be doing it, or taking a stronger position with the renegotiation of the 2007 interim guidelines, recognizing that we have interim guidelines that will never refill Lake Powell?
I think there are a lot of points there.
Yeah.
I guess I can start with the last thing you said, which is renegotiation of the 07 guidelines, and I kind of want to emphasize that we are going to consider all the information at our disposal and all the information we've gathered in the last, many years on hydrology, on operations, on all of that as we enter renegotiation of those 07 guidelines. So there's that. As far as the need for demand management, we don't know if it's going to make sense to set up a demand management program. Getting back to that 500,000 acre foot cap, this was a big ask to the lower basin, the demand management program in the upper basin. And one thing that they needed to agree to that was an initial cap of 500,000 acre feet. They weren't really willing to let us, I don't know that we could have anyway, but create a larger bank than that at this time. So that's something that could change in the future. That's what we're working with right now. But looking just.
But what does that do to our economy?
Well, the goal here with this entire feasibility investigation is again to figure out how it might be a net positive to everyone. If there are negative impacts to our economy, to just individual communities, what can we do to mitigate that? If it doesn't make sense for Colorado, we're not going to do it. I mean, plain and simple, we're just not going to do it. If it's going to destroy our economy, we're not going to do it. So, those are the very questions that we're looking at right now. What are the impacts, and how can we address them? Can we? What are the tools that we need in place to do that? How can local communities be involved in that? Those are the very, very questions that we're kind of hoping to get at. So I think they're all great concerns, and we, sometimes when we talk about it, we're like, we are some of the biggest skeptics of demand management here, because we're thinking about these things all the time too, thinking how can we get to a point where this all comes together and all works? We don't know if that will happen.
Well, and in regards to the economics of it, it's not, we don't want it to be very positive in one area and very negative in another. It definitely needs to be down to the sub-level, and that's what we're looking at. And that's why we're being very careful as we move forward. We know that there's a lot at stake with this. And when we go out and have these discussions, people are like, where do we sign up? Where do we sign up? And we're saying, okay, we need to be really thoughtful as we move forward, because if we had a whole area that signed up and some didn't, what does that do? What does that do? And so we're really trying to keep all of that in mind moving forward. And the 500,000 acre feet may not be enough to be a silver bullet per se, but is it enough to learn? And is it enough to take what we learn from that as we move forward into the negotiations and go from there?
Ms. Whitmore.
Sorry.
Becky, when you were here before, I think you were still kind of working on what is even the definition of demand management, and at the time you said, that's part of this process is defining that. And I'm just wondering if you have a better sense of how you would define demand management at this point. And in particular, it keeps sounding as though the focus is just on agricultural water and agricultural uses. And I'm just wondering, are you looking at municipal demand management, and what other options are you looking at?
I think that's part of the definition, is that equity piece, and equity across all types and uses, and geographic equity also. So that I think there is further definition on demand management, but I don't think I think what comes out of this will be what demand management may or may not be. We still have to take it to the other upper basin states. So I apologize if it seems like we're talking all about agriculture, because I that's not our perception. We know that this is going to have to be on the backs of everyone, and we know there's benefit to agriculture if there was if we were able to get a program like this through, or if there was something that came out of this, there could be some financial benefit to agriculture. And so maybe we talk about it in that perspective, but I don't want it to seem like we're only talking about agriculture. We know that others are gonna have to take hits or it's not worth it. Part of the reason why I do what I do is because I think that agriculture is important to the state of Colorado. Why Colorado's water plan came about was some of that cry to action, because of the way we were moving wasn't in a way that was benefit to the values that is Colorado. And so I hold that dear. And that is incredibly important to me. When you drive over here and you see what people may consider open space, that's not open space, that's somebody's agricultural land. But it is what people see when they come to the state of Colorado. When they live here, that's what I love. And so we're not going to do something that is injurious to one group. And I appreciate our farmer and rancher friends, and that's my familial history, and so it's very important to me also. And while it may not be the work that I'm in on a daily basis, it is part of what I think is important, not only in Colorado, but across our country.
Yes, Dr. Fresca.
To that point, when I hear folks talk about demand management, I sense different people have different understandings as to what it means, what it might be, what they'd like it to be. So there is no consistent definition of that yet. And a definition from the state, I think, would be very helpful at a point soon.
Okay.
I wanted to return to your earlier comments about the power pool level and its relationship to a bank in Lake Powell. When you were here 6 months ago, Becky, I shared with you that it's been determined that as long as the power generators on the Glen Canyon Dam have a water supply to continue generating power, the upper basin is very unlikely to fall out of compliance with the compact. Does that tell us that we need to be addressing that power pool level? Do we want to have a dialogue with the Bureau of Reclamation or whatever other agencies are also relevant to this as to what their expectations are going to be in the event of a protracted drought and the falling level of Lake Powell begins to threaten power generation as well as compact compliance, but it's going to be a threat to power generation first, apparently. So do we know what the Bureau of Reclamation or any other federal agency might do in the event that the power pool level becomes a threat to power generation?
So I want to, I guess, make one point. I think this is what leads us to this type of proactive planning process, because if we don't have some plan, if we don't have some mechanism to both keep us from reaching the critical elevations in Powell and potentially mitigate or avoid a being out of compact compliance, then it is our belief, and not just at the state of Colorado, but in the upper basin, that the federal government will come in and begin to make decisions on our behalf. And that is a huge driver. It was a huge driver when we negotiated the 1948 compact, and it continues to be a driver. So I think that is really one of the fundamental motivations for us here, is for us to have some sort of proactive plan in place so that the Secretary of the Interior can point to something and say, here, this is what the states have agreed to. We've bought off on it. We have buy-in this, and so we think this is a workable plan, and these are the steps that we're going to take to avoid reaching that level. But if we sit here and we don't develop anything and we don't have a plan, they will make those decisions for us and we will no longer have a seat at the table. Because our biggest concern, as it was when we negotiated the 22 compact, we've got bigger elephants in the room, California and Arizona, that have more folks and more money and more congressmen and women, and that's where that water's gonna go if we lose our seat at the table. That's our concern, so.
I've got a question about that. You know, I've heard that a number of times, but I still have some belief in the courts.
She worked there. Do you ever believe in the courts?
You know, and
Depends on which court.
so to run out of fear doesn't make sense. We know what our rights are under the compact, under the 1948 compact, and all of those things. I think maybe one of the things we ought to say is to the lower basin is we're required to deliver 7.5, and that's all we deliver, unless we go to the 8.23. But we continue, this organization right here is being very careful with our money and water. We're not spending out more than what we absolutely have to. Yet we continue to run at 9 million acre feet on an annualized basis. And I'm beginning to wonder, are we causing our own problem by not saying to the lower basin, look, this is what we're required to do, this is what we're going to do. And on the other side of that is if the 9.0 million acre feet, is that needed from the Bureau of Reclamation to generate electricity rather than the delivery downstream?
Those two things are separate because.
Okay, but the question I ask then is if we're delivering 9.0 and they're generating electricity off of that, what happens if we say to them, we're gonna go to 8.23? Can we do that?
Well, that's a really good question, and we don't have, I think, answers to that at this point in time. Now, we are currently operating under the 2007 interim guidelines, and under that, based on water year and elevation levels in Lake Powell, certain releases are triggered. So we could, depending on hydrology, be in an 8.23 release. In 2012, we released 7.48.
I was here when we did that.
So we've released less than the 9. I think that one of the things that one of our takeaways from the 2007 interim guidelines was that we looked at historical hydrology. And unfortunately, starting in 2000, we didn't have a hydrology that looked like anything we'd had in the past. So hydrology was not our friend and put us behind the power curve in terms of what elevation tiers we were in Lake Powell and the releases that needed to be made. Because the original modeling had said we would be, based on historical hydrology, somewhere an even split between the 9 million. And remember, the lower basin has the 7.5 plus the 1 for
Plus,
development
the
in
other
the
thing
lower
is with
basin.
Arizona gaming the system to make us be at 9.0.
Yeah, that wasn't good.
That was not cool.
That was not cool. I totally agree
And,
with that.
you know, those are the kind of things that I am concerned about.
Me too.
You know, but we're paying the price. These guys up here that are gonna irrigate 20% less of their place are paying the price for those games.
Well, I think that, first of all, I think part of our issue is that the upper basin bears the by far the greatest burden of drying hydrology. If we have a dry year or successive dry years, the upper basin bears the brunt of that. We don't have a Lake Mead above us. So we have challenges there. So we're going to experience those shortages right out of the gate because Lake Powell lies below us.
But that's our insurance policy too.
Yep.
So, you know, we need to be using it as an insurance policy versus operating as a twin brother to Lake Mead.
And right now,
those are the kind of things that are causing us and me concern when we start talking about this. Sure, they make some cuts, but those cuts are nothing like what some of these guys made in 2018. Nobody went to 50%, but in my country, we went to 50% because that's the amount of water we had. Still made a crop, but it was pretty tough. But when we talk about cuts down there, you know, we see what, 8%? Is that what they made this summer? Kind of cuts in
8%
8%, right? Every year in the Uncompahgre Valley, we go to 90% because of runoff. Well, that's just something that's part of life. So we all do demand management in Colorado anyway, because of what we have in the resource in the river. But the guys that are farming down there, they don't cut. They're now gonna start at 8%. So it just makes me wonder if we continue to run water down through, across the Lee's Ferry at 9.0 or whatever it is. The only thing that does for us is it gives us the 10-year rolling average and a bigger and better number,
Well,
right? Are you gonna say to me, we're not using the rolling average now?
no, we are, but keep in mind that part of that 10-year rolling average that we're looking at now, the 92 plus million acre feet, that's about to drop down to about 83 million acre feet in 10, because we had 2011 where we released about 13.4 million acre feet that year. So we had a huge release. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is that the guidelines, before the guidelines, you were operating under a long-term reservoir operating criteria, where it would call for equalization releases when Powell reached a certain elevation. Massive, big slugs of water going to Mead. The 07 guidelines were intended to temper that and basically make fewer, smaller, but more regular releases to Mead. So that is one thing that the 07 guidelines has been very successful in doing, because it is very likely that if we were still under an LROC operating criteria, we would have been making some pretty massive equalization releases that would have actually resulted in the elevation in Lake Powell being lower than it is now and more in Mead, or maybe Mead just drops because they're going to take whatever's in Mead anyway.
The next question I have for you is, are we still making those massive releases to flush the Grand Canyon?
I can say a few things here. First, you might be thinking of the high flow experiment. Is that correct?
Well, adaptive management, I think is how it came.
Sure. So I
The
think
pulse flow.
the pulse flow or the high flow experiment. So that was. I just want to make clear that that did not at all affect the annual release from Lake Powell.
But
Essentially,
it
what
did
that
do something to levels.
it retimed the water coming out of Lake Powell. So
Yeah, she's correct on that,
it
Mark.
didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't actually impact the amount of water ultimately coming out of Lake Powell. It just retimed it.
Okay.
To
So
come
that's,
all at once.
yeah. And if I could, I just wanted to make a couple of notes on a few things that you said. The first is, I just want to emphasize that looking forward, we recognize there are issues in the lower basin. We know, and the lower basin knows that the structural deficit is a real issue that they have to deal with. So the 07 guidelines, we can talk as much as we want about that. But we really believe that they were negotiated with the best information that they had at the time. Going forward, we recognize, the basin recognizes that there are issues that need to be addressed. So we're cognizant of those going forward, and I just want to emphasize that. And the other thing is, I heard you talking a lot about kind of the fear response, and why not just let it go to the courts? Why inject all of this? Why react in fear? And when I think about fear and what keeps me up at night, I think about 7 state litigation. I think about what that would do to the west slope of Colorado. I think about what that would do to agriculture in Colorado. I think about people who would be feeling pressure to I don't know, to do a lot of things with their water rights. And what I prefer to that is setting up a program that people only participate in if they want to, if it's beneficial to them. Not something that they're doing out of fear, something that they can look at and say, you know, this makes sense for my operation this year, so I'm going to do it. As opposed to the instability, the fear, the litigate, everything that would entail a compact curtailment situation. Being a lawyer, I like the Supreme Court. I think they do a lot of great things, but I frankly don't want to see this case before the Supreme Court, and that's where it would go. And I don't think they know as much about water as the people sitting right here.
There are other questions or?
Well, when he's relating to the fear, I think the issue becomes is you make the deal and then it becomes, it's voluntary or, you know, and then all of a sudden somebody somewhere else thinks that this beneficial pool hike was the best thing since sliced bread. Now it becomes mandatory. And how do you get yourself out of that? Because I think that is a real fear from people. Today it's voluntary. Next week it's going to be mandatory because the secondary benefits outweigh
I don't know if there's anything in place that would make it mandatory unless there was a curtailment, and then it would be a different situation. And so, I
I think what Stan's talking about is that, you know, the fear and the concern, I would say, not fear, but the informed concern that,
That's
you know, once you set a market up and it allows for the easy transfer of water from a consumptive use to a non-consumptive use, and you set that market up, you set the shepherding up, you set the whole, you know, field up, then you start with a sideboard that says maybe, say, 20% of any one basin can't be dried up at any given time, and then 10 years from now, it becomes, well, maybe 30%, and then 5 years later, it's maybe 40%, and that's, I think that, Stan, if I'm not mistaken, that's what you're getting at, and so it's, I think,
That's
it's not an
helpful to
answer
hear.
to that, it's
Yeah.
just, I think it's important to hear that concern, because I
Yeah.
hear that concern throughout the West Slope, and I think
Because
this,
today it may
you know,
be this, and it kind of moves, and then who makes that determination? It really isn't Mark Catlin, even though he's a very eloquent speaker sometimes.
He is?
But
He did
yeah.
say cool today, so.
He did say
It's not cool.
But then then you have Andy, but that is where I'm coming from, because next thing you know, you're kind of out on the plank, so to speak, and then all of a sudden these benefits, these unintended consequences are much beneficial to a whole lot of other people, because Mr. Catlin today can't raise strawberries, but they can, and there was some over there earlier this morning that came from there. Then you're absolutely right what you said about the congressmen and the senators. You can buy more cars in Japan than you can in the United States at a discounted price. And that's exactly where we're afraid that that's going to go.
Well, and I don't think I have a answer, but I hope that by hearing this concern, and I hope that we continue to hear it, that it's part of the things that we address as we're looking at demand management. I'm hearing it a little more loudly and clearly at this point, and so I think we'll take note of this and make sure that we put the checkpoints in, that there's just not an automatic movement to a mandatory, and we have one of my board members here that.
Two.
Oh,
Look behind you.
I didn't see
They're sneaking in.
I got a couple of my board members here.
That's
Thank
why
you,
we started
Lawson.
being nice.
I was like,
Showed up, yeah.
I was like, there's a pivotal shift like 20 minutes ago. But having two of them in here to hear that too, I think that that's something as we look forward and we're making those policy decisions, that's important that we factor these kinds of things in.
One
You
one
can call
thing
it
I'd like,
demand management creep.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
one of the things I'd like to make mention of is that I guess I worry about, we're renting our water downstream. It's really what's happening. So selling permanent water taps and fire hydrants on rented water is not gonna turn out well for somebody. And more than likely, it'll be us. That's what's concerned.
That was the proposals of the 80s and 90s, the Galloway Group, Resource Conservation Group, Chevron. We had a number of schemes which Colorado very successfully fought back and fought very strongly against those for just 20 years, only 20 years. And then you'll get it
Very
back. So that's, some of us have been around long enough to remember those. Mr. Gray, and then we need to wrap this thing up, Mr. Trampy.
Okay, so well, I really appreciate the information on the work groups and the demand management, and I know that anytime you have a little sidebar discussion in Colorado about that, conversation always turns to all the things you talked about. How's it going to be shepherded? What's the equity? How's it going to be proportioned? And you could sum it all up in that there's a concern is what are the impacts to us? And are there going to be winners and losers? And so the work groups and all that you're doing is to try to get as much information about all of that. So what I'm about to say is I'm going to say it as a question, but it's kind of a comment, is that what about the impact to risk? And it goes with Stan's question of shouldn't we be, or you be, talking about what the impact to risk is, because the way you get demand management creep is that the 500,000 doesn't mitigate the risk. And so if you raise the amount from from 500,000 to some other amount, then the impacts are vastly different. You know, we're talking, instead of curtailing 10%, we might be talking curtailing 25% of conserved consumptive use, which is a hugely different impact. So shouldn't we have in the public forum, shouldn't we be talking about the impact or risk that demand management would do at a certain level? Tiered effect of 500,000, this is the impact at 2 million.
So the work groups are actually already starting to think about that. And they're already thinking about tools that they can kind of use to analyze, well, if Colorado sends this much water to, you know, to Lake Powell, how will that impact differ if we send this much more, or, you know, stuff like that. So that's very much part of the conversation. And to your point about assessing risk, I just want to be very clear that the entire reason that we're even investigating demand management is to avoid risk and to avoid the type of involuntary, forced curtailment that could happen. We're not going to force anyone to do demand management. I want to be very clear about that. This is I can't even say voluntary without saying temporary first, but it would be a voluntary program. And the entire point is to avoid getting to a place where
No, I understand. When I maybe used the wrong nomenclature. Impact risk, I mean, how much will it reduce?
of a compact curtailment situation, right?
Yeah.
Cost versus benefit.
Sure.
Yeah, cost benefit, and cost benefit of a 500,000 versus some other larger amount, which as Stan's concerned about it, and all of us are, is we see the bend the curve slide, and we say, you know, we're not gonna end up at 500,000. We're assessing what 500,000 will do, but we all know that if it becomes a program, it's gonna have to grow to make a difference.
Well, and I think it's important to recognize with the free storage, it is 500,000 for the upper basin states at this point.
Right.
So there'd be a whole different analysis if we had to pay for the storage, and what that would look like.
Mr. Tramp, you have the last question.
I have a hard time understanding everything that's going on in the state of Colorado as far as water and development and growth is concerned. I guess maybe I live at the wrong place in our state because I see the direct benefits and obstacles of growth in probably a minor case, but it's certainly affecting agriculture. And we're not even having to deal with a shortage of water by demand management. We're dealing with a shortage of water from Mother Nature. Okay, and if you look at the maps, we're back in the moderate drought circle. And so, you know, everybody was gloriously happy this spring because we had water running out of our ears, and now we got dust blowing in the snowstorms. So we're talking about, in my mind, going back into a bad hydrology situation. We've got untold, undescribable growth going on. And we've got all these people coming to Colorado demanding water, demanding a quality of life that we advertise and encourage people to come and participate in. But yet we're talking about demand management. And I really have a hard time relating to both worlds, okay? Because as Mark said, in my country, without storage, we practice demand management all the time. And now, you know, my good cowboy buddies feel like they need to participate in some kind of a program so that we can get the East Slope to participate in the program as well. And they're having a hard time buying into all of this stuff and being able to figure out how they can stay in business, because we're not a row crop outfit. We irrigate a forage crop that goes from year to year to year. And there's a lot of people who didn't have much hay crop a year ago, and some of those people don't have a very good hay crop this year because their country suffered so last year. So that's just a bite of what we're looking for or looking at as far as demand management is concerned, if we can figure out a way to participate. And I don't think there's probably enough dollars to compensate those people enough to keep them in business. Because most of us that are in that business today are not there because we want to get rich. We're there because we're resource managers and we believe deeply in resource management and being able to turn that forage resource into something for you folks, all of us, to be able to consume. And so it's mind-boggling to me that we're at this point where we're advertising to bring more people and more demand to our state on the one hand, and on the other hand, we're trying to stop demand and consumptive use.
I could understand how it would be somewhat mind-boggling. Our population predictions have slowed, by the way. But I do think,
Those are just predictions anyways.
Yeah.
They'll-
the factor of error, I'm not even gonna say plus or minus what it is. But I think the intention, in this is that, we don't lose what you're talking about, the way of life that you're talking about. It's not that you live in the wrong place, it's that you live in the right place, I think sometimes. And so how do we do this in a way that at the same time we're doing a bunch of other things that are in the water plan about conservation and land management and best management practices as it relates to growth? How do we do this at the same time that we're doing those things? And so it is complicated, and it is something that keeps us all up at night. I'm sure the people right here are not the only ones kept up at night because of this. And so how do we do this in the best way for everyone? And I don't have the answer yet. And I don't think you guys have the answer yet. I don't think there's someone with the answer that's holding it and waiting for the right time to release it. I think we all have to come to the right answer together, and what's right for all of us. And what's right for all of us as the state of Colorado. And I don't think that means you, Bill Trampy, not being able to survive doing what you love. And or your neighbors or your cowboy friends that say, how do we make this work? So I think we all have to figure out how to get to that answer together. And it does seem bewildering that we're talking about growth at the same time, but we're talking about multiple things at the same time.
Well, I want to thank you for coming here, for taking the beautiful drive over and a beautiful day and coming to meet with us, and invite you back as often as you can, and take good use of our staff resources. We stand by here to assist in whatever way we can. So.
We are committed to being here. We're committed to being a part of the conversation with you all. We hope that we never act so offensively that we don't get invited back, and that we can. Well, I might. These two won't.
Just bring some scotch next time.
But I hope that this is really the beginning of a good relationship, and that we all can continue to work together as we speak unified for Colorado.
And I just want to take a moment to thank Becky for being very proactive in reaching out as she ascended into the throne of commissioner. And she's doing a great job. We're looking forward to working with her. She's been very much in contact with us and others throughout the West Slope and the Front Range. And she's right that we need to speak with one voice on interstate issues, and it's really critical. Our job, and we take it seriously here at the district, is to advise and to provide the best possible information for you and the state's team. We'll continue to do that. We're committed to doing that. And there are times where we may respectfully disagree on intrastate issues, and that's part of our job too. So, but we often also do really respect and appreciate all the work that all three of you do. So.
We don't always advise and consent, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Fleming, going to return to wrap up your items?
Sure. Jason's assistance. After the executive session discussion this morning, I provided a summary of the items in the discussion in executive session. There were two recommendations for board action on items discussed. The first, I would make a recommendation that the board authorize the expenditure of an additional $20,000 as a contract amendment with Bishop Brogdon for CRCA implementation analysis, furtherance of refinement of that work.
We have a motion, motion by Stegelmeyer. Second by Trampy. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you.
Next item was the Fraser project that Jason was going to take up.
Yes, recommend that the board adopt a motion confirming its intent to develop the Fraser feeder canal, 150 CFS, the Fraser pumping plant pipeline at 35 CFS, and Branch Creek Reservoir at 20,000 acre feet, and direct staff and council to file a joint application with Grand County and the Middle Park Water Conservancy District seeking the finding of reasonable diligence for those roads.
So moved. Motion by Richard. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Chandler Henry. Any further discussion?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to make sure that the record is really, really clear that the district absolutely intends to move forward with these rights in conjunction with its partners, and that we recognize the value of the water rights for future use by our water partners and our constituents.
Let the motion reflect that. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. One last item there?
One last action item, unless there were questions about anything else in the general counsel report, happy to discuss those at any time. But the other item that was what we added to the agenda was a request for action on insurance requirements that we require of our contractors. Jason.
Yes, there was a handout memo for you. In 2013, the legislature adopted statutory changes to the Colorado Governmental Communities Act, and that sort of raised the cap from 600,000 up to 990,000 per occurrence. Our current requirements of any contractors are that they carry insurance up to $1 million. Those legislative changes also came with an escalator that's adjusted every 5 years. In 2018, that escalator took effect, and the statutory waiver now is at $1,093,000. So our recommendation to you is that we up our contractual requirements. We put there in our recommendation either to 1.5 million or to 2 million, depending on how often you want to hear about this issue from us. But so we would recommend that we adjust those statutory limits within all of our contracts.
Any discussion? Yes, Mrs. Stegelmeyer.
I'm just wondering if it might make sense to have a motion that says that we would like to increase the cap to this amount, but then, and be adjusted to statutory requirements so that it's not a continual
Mr. Munger?
analysis.
So I guess back to Karn's comments, the 1.5 would seem more sensible to me, because if you have multi-year contracts, 1 year it could be in compliance, and then the next year we'd have to renegotiate the contract to make sure that you'd have the coverage. So I don't know if 1.5 is the right number, but I don't know. I'll defer.
This is adjusted every 5 years, so.
I would just say, in my experience in doing contracts with governmental entities, I'm seeing most of the contracts at 2 million right now anyway. So I don't think 2 million is unexpected by most contractors, unless they're a very small contractor and you can always adjust if you need to, but I don't think 2 million is that big of a deal.
One of the concerns we've had is if we set it to the set amount, then we're going to be having different, similar to Director Meyer's comments, you have a different contract amount for this contract, a different amount for that other contract, and it will be more cumbersome than it's worth.
Mr. Wintery, is someone engaged in this contracting type of work? What are your thoughts on this?
You know,
Director Whitmore is correct. I mean, we're doing one for the town of Vale, and it's $10 million is what they want. They also, like CDOT and a lot of these play in public, especially when you're in the water thing, they also are requiring a pollution insurance, which can get kind of expensive on the others because general liability won't cover that kind of environmental pollution. So depending on what work you're having done, that may also, to me, would be a good requirement. It's kind of expensive to obtain and it's hard to do, but it definitely protects your interest in that. And my suggestion would be do a $2 million contract and then as on an needed basis, depending on what the work to be done was, is add the piece for the pollution insurance thing. And it generally costs between $3,500 and about $7,500 a year for that pollution insurance, but it will definitely cover any kind of environmental thing that could arise from your thing. And that's just a thought. Thanks for asking.
Is it a thought or a motion?
That's a motion.
Motion? Is there a second, Mr. Vanderbrink?
Yeah, that's exactly what we do as well. It's $2 million for our Taylor Draw hydroelectric and stuff, so.
Just as a point of clarification on the motion, did the motion include the pollution
No,
insurance factor?
it doesn't include that.
It's just a suggestion to you to think about it.
It's just a
We'll look
suggestion
into
to
that.
think about it.
Yeah.
But I think
We have required that type of insurance for those types of
Those
projects
types
where
of
that's
projects.
considered.
Okay.
So.
Okay, we have a motion on the table for $2 million. We have a second, Mr. Munger.
So I just play the devil advocate. I mean, we end up paying for that as being hiring the contractors. It's a pass-through to us.
It is.
So
Yeah.
I guess that's a self-preference, and I'm all right with the motion. I just want to bring that up.
Okay.
No, I pass the buck.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You just eat that, right?
Yeah.
We do it for free.
Yeah, okay. Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Any other questions on Mr. Fleming's report? Covered the activities of the last 3 months or so. Okay, hearing none, director's concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let's see, let's start with Mr. Munger, go around the table with director's concerns at this point.
So again, I guess we're going to continue on our discussion with both CWCB and the division engineers regarding the in-stream flow and prior. So that's one of the concerns. I guess we just have been having some recent discussions and specifically in Director Gray's area about having water meters and things on pumped water. So we might be asking for a little bit of help or not help, or maybe just consultation with Peter and Andy, have some discussion on that. So I'll let Director Gray to follow up on that. I didn't have anything else.
Mr. Acofresca.
I didn't come here today with any prepared remarks for directors concerned, and we had some opportunity this morning to share some of our thoughts as well as with our guests here just a moment ago. I would say in Mesa County, the local daily newspaper has done a pretty fair job of framing for readers the fact that we are in fact still in a long-term drought. And I think that's being accepted by most everybody, particularly those in the water community. We're hoping that the 2019 winter was not just a freak event, and we hope it becomes more of a trend, but all we have to do is stick around and wait and see.
Okay. Mr. Stegelmeyer.
I pointed out to a couple people here that this is the first ever situation in Summit County where we have 2 ski areas open, and at the same time we are in a fire ban and really concerned about the dry weather. So it's an interesting, example of erratic weather and that we have had predicted. And I guess I would just throw out another erratic thing with all of our discussions with earlier and related to Denver Water. we have such wonderful relationships with Denver Water, but it's so erratic. Sometimes we can make really good decisions together in a day, and other times it just takes weeks and weeks and doesn't seem to have any logic behind it. So it's sort of like the weather.
Maybe
And I
the
can't
bipolar.
quite figure it out.
Like a crazy ex-spouse or something, or?
That's it.
Mr. Alvey, huh?
Just a update on something going on in our basin. We've finally got a contract awarded for repairs on Paonia Reservoir outlet works, the Bureau's money primarily. This is MOA money. They're starting construction work in November, and it'll be a 2-year project, so we're pretty excited about that.
Thank you. Mr. Richard.
A couple things, excuse me. One, I was talking to Paul Boucher about the RCPP money that was received up in Grand County for the IBLK down by the Kremlin, and I had him send us some pictures today of some of the work that they recently completed this year. This is the actual heading on his ditch in the Colorado River, and you can see the old rock structure that goes out, the damage is on the top left-hand side and everything, and how it's failing. Go ahead. Thanks, Nate. This is downstream from that, west of it, shooting back up. They're currently working on it at that, well, they're not out in the water there at that point in time, but it looks like that may be the completed structure. Go ahead. This is Paul here. This is how they keep track of what's going on in the river and everything off of his boots. So that way the paper's not lost. He can still go ahead and show the contractors what's happening and everything. Okay, thanks. This is just shooting downstream. This is what the Colorado River looks like there. If you look at the right side, you can see all the rocks that are getting ready to go in for protection of the stream bank there. Okay. This is the completed work with the rocks in place, topsoil put back in to protect that bank and everything. Okay. This is right after they got done putting the seed down and everything, and the work there. You can see the big rocks on the top side there. That's fine. Keep going. Thank you. Another part of the work, this is actually down on Thompson's place, Bill Thompson's place. You can see all the rocks lined up just below the vehicle there. They'll be getting ready to go in there as a structure to raise the water level through there to create a habitat, as well as to bring that water table back up to a higher level. Okay.
And that's, I believe, all we've got because we just started Thompson this morning. So.
Okay. The one other one that was there was on the completed work, he had a better shot somewhere. I don't know where it came from. I guess I ended up with it. But the work that's being done there has been tremendous. There's, I believe, 8 different landowners that are involved in this project and everything. It's been very beneficial from several different perspectives for the fishing habitat, especially with these low flows anymore. Just the protection of the habitat has been incredible, and we certainly appreciate the work that they've done for that and everything. One other thing is Grand County sent a group of individuals to the Sonoran Institute, the Growing Water Smart in the headwaters, and they ended up receiving Grand County received a grant from the Sonoran Institute to develop a drought management plan up there. And there's going to be a series of 8 meetings between now, into this month, and May 2020. Part of the process here is not so much from the ag perspective, but more from the towns and the water districts, to where they can start generating plans on how they're going to handle low flows and things like that. Sounds like a pretty good thing that's going to happen within the county. The other thing I'd like to do is thank Andy and Hunter in the River District for the tour that they had for the elected officials up there in Grand County on Wolford. Even though there wasn't a lot of elected officials there, it was very beneficial for for them to see that and to see what the River District has done to the reservoir with the crest work and the water outlets and everything. So,
Thank you. You definitely get the golden goblet for the best organized directors concerned
well,
presentation ever.
if it wasn't for Paul, we probably wouldn't have had all the pictures.
Yeah.
But no, he's very proud of
Oh,
the work
yeah.
that's being done up there and everything, and I think that's something that, as we look forward to projects and stuff, those are the type of things that are very important.
Yeah.
For these streams.
They are. And it has benefits all the way on downstream.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Mr. Trampy?
I think the only thing I have to report or talk about is the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District has commissioned Harvey Economics to do an economic study of the potential ramifications of demand management in the Upper Basin. And Harvey Economics was in town last month and interviewed, 7 or 8 different ranchers to get their views about various things, and they're going to not only talk about, or Harvey will not only talk about the impacts upon ranching, but impacts upon our local community as well as adjoining communities like Montrose, Olathe, Salida. And so it'll be interesting to see how all that comes out. In some respects, I was one of the guys that they interviewed, and some of the questions I thought were somewhat premature because we really don't know what demand management's going to amount to, and what is fallowing, what's that mean, to what extent are we talking about fallowing, are we talking about deficit irrigation? So there's some of those kinds of things that it's really hard to, it was hard for me to answer questions in regard to some of that because I really didn't know what they were after. But that's the only thing I have for this afternoon.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Winery?
You know, the drought thing, I think, the demand management piece, I don't know what to think about it, but it's kind of concerning today that you can jump across a mud puddle and make dust. And I hope that, no offense, that we didn't have, like Steve wanted, that not just a trend. I don't want that much snow and avalanches in one time, but I think the concern is I hope they hear you, the folks do. I do hope that, and because there's no really place to back up anymore. That's really it. What else do you have to give?
Mr. Gray?
I don't know that I have much of anything other than just to follow up on what Director Monger said. We have, I guess, about 500 people got their direct order to cease and desist unless they have a measuring device on their pump or in their ditch. Wow. And I think there's other alternatives to that strict of an interpretation of measuring devices. We have quite a group of people now that they've got those letters that are coming out of the woodwork. I don't know how many will come out. We have everything from the creek I'm on where there's pumps. You can't keep a meter running there. It pumps too much sand. And it'll eat up a meter in half a season. And they're expensive. So we need to work on that, and we will be talking to Andy and Peter, I think, to see if we can get some guidance at the very least on how to convene a group without that turning into a battle, and what some of the alternatives might be.
Okay. Peter?
Just to chime in a little bit on that, Director Gray, of course, the state engineer will be here tomorrow, and that would be something you might want to discuss with him as well. We've also heard that in addition to head gates and measuring flumes at head gates, there is an effort to require the installation of measuring flumes on tailwater as well.
How about sub-irrigation?
We've heard that as well.
That's the one that I was brought to my attention.
Yeah.
Like that.
Measured tailwater?
Yes.
Correct.
And they were making that
too much
mandatory.
place in my interpretation. And deep perk seepage, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of concerns, Mr. Catlin.
Well, we don't have those concerns, I don't think.
Wait.
Yet. But, things seem to be pretty good in our country. Harvest is pretty much done. The boss of the water users is here in the room. I will let him make a report on his outfit.
Well, that's about as long as I've gone without a question about him. I do think we saw some benefits in the valley. This year we did run the project at 100% for the first time in my memory ever. Combination of great water here. I think we're seeing some dividends on that respect from the Selenium piping that we put in over the years, and the hemp contributed too. They made a lot of the country black and then didn't plant some of it, and when they planted it, they used drip irrigation, so consumptive use substantially smaller than what we typically see.
Was the CU smaller or just the diversion smaller?
We're diverting the same amount of water.
I was wondering about the consumptive use. Is that, what is a CU one have compared to?
Rather than go on some sort of percentage,
yeah,
we didn't have to.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Ms. Chandler Henry.
I wanted to give a report from the Rudai Water and Power Authority. We had a board meeting last night. This summer season, there were 6 contaminated boats found in an ANS inspection, and that was the highest number in the state as of a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know if anybody's passed Rudai or not, but that's a lot of boats. 5 of the 6 were from Lake Powell. So we continue to increase the hours, increase the days, try and get as good a handle as possible. It's hard to find staffing up there, but continues to be a huge concern.
They don't put a chain across there, do they?
They do.
Oh, do they now? Okay, because
Which gets broken because people don't get out in time. So,
no.
So they're trying to figure out how to deal with that. But it is closed at 7:30 at night. Boaters would like it to be open until it gets dark in the summer. So that's been a staffing issue. That's important. It's Eagle County. We're working on land use regs rewrite and trying to use some of the things we learned with Sonoran Institute on land use, water planning to get those in the, not only in the water provider regs, but in the county regs. And we also are in stage 1 fire restrictions, really dry, medium fires. Just, you look crossways and you're catching on fires.
Okay. Mr. Vandenbrink.
I'm going to just kind of touch on one key item, and I know we had a recent conference call I did with River District and some staff, and I have to say, forgive my passion once in a while. When I talk, I was just really glad I was with good company. So that people really need to understand that I'm a very passionate when it comes to fish. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. So, I do want to say, give an update. The White River is the last main stem river in the upper basin to the Colorado tributary to have a programmatic biological opinion on it. We've been almost 18 years plus in the works, start and stop of getting this thing going. In the past 3 years, that's been probably about 30% of my life getting this thing done. In October, we actually issued in September, we issued an RFP. We are in the review process of selecting a contractor, and we have a schedule that within 18 months, we'll have a cooperative agreement and a finished PBO for the White River. So that's I'm hoping for that. It's huge because now maybe we can finally start getting some development on the White River, because that's been hamstringing us for decades when you have no more water to develop and you have Section 7 consultation kind of sitting there dangling out in front of you, you know. Now that I'm in it, I've learned a lot. Thanks for the River District staff for kind of chiming in, but there's going to be another time here where the River District, I think, should consider providing some comment. We are developing future depletions right now, and for the White River, that's throwing a dart at a barn door. I don't know if that's the right acronym or not, but just because we've got over 600,000 acres of conditional water rights, and try to identify what's real logical in a future depletion development is kind of a moving target. But also within that, there's, draft flow minimum flow recommendations. There's some concern over that as well, to where it might be too low. For me as a fish guy, that fish gets rather large, and when you got 2 inches of water, it kind of curtails a fish that gets that big and round, so they have a hard time swimming through it. So if it behooves the river district, I would encourage them to provide comment when the applicable time is there. So I will continue to do my best on my part, representing my constituency, but there's a time as well to where the river district may have to come in and provide some expertise for constituency that I can't necessarily provide input for, that are outside of my jurisdiction.
So we understand that the flow recommendations comments are due on the 21st of this month on the draft that was released. And we have some very able staff sitting over there in the corner who are working on that.
Yes.
Maybe as we speak, but they are working on that, and so we do intend to.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time on the phone. And you were passionate.
Thanks for hanging with my passion.
And if you weren't passionate, we would have thought something was wrong.
Where's Eldon? Ms. Hazard?
Saguache County is also in the fire ban. I don't know at what point we tried to hay. It was too wet, and then all of a sudden we're in a drought. So, also, the Decker fire is included in Saguache County on the east side.
Okay.
It's not lost any structures, but it's getting close. And also, Bill talked about all the people coming to Colorado, and Gunnison County, Saguache County's obviously being hit too. But, our tourism, and I've said it before, and we've all talked about it, tourism wants everybody to come see Colorado. They all want to see our backyard, but we still don't have the infrastructure to handle what's coming. So I don't think it's necessarily up to us to, or our board, to take care of that. But, I think the tourism boards, the state of Colorado really needs to think hard about that, because we're having to clean up that mess, all of us.
Ms. Whitmore?
There's no drought in Ireland. I use my raincoat every day. And I would just say that my horses are really shaggy already this year, like they were last year, in stark contrast to what they looked like in the fall of 2017. So I'm optimistic.
Is that like a woolly caterpillar?
I'm optimistic. We're just working on finalizing our study, and hopefully we'll be working with our partners, Tri-County and Ouray County Water Users Association, as well as Ouray County, for all of the water users in Ouray County, on hopefully a water rights application before the end of the year.
Okay, great. A couple items from my discussions with the Garfield County Commissioners yesterday, in preparation for the board meeting. And one, it was, as Zane heard, I came right in after their discussion with Kirby Wynn on oil and gas development issues and the impacts on Garfield County and what's going to be coming along. And I took the opportunity to take a quick look at the packet that I provided them, which had our budget and our assessed valuations over the past 11 or 12 years, I believe it was. And, Garfield County a few years back was the highest assessed valuation in the district. We've slipped down to number 4 behind Eagle, Pitkin, and Summit counties. Summit counties. But what was more telling on that, because I'm concerned, is that our assessed valuation this year was 4% over what it was in 2008. Not per year, but it is our assessed valuation. There's been some ups and downs through the 10 and 11 or so, but our total assessed valuation is only 4% greater than it was 11 years ago. And that is very telling as we go into the future, because we also talked about the issues that Pacific Corp has indicated they want to retire those plants in Moffett and Routt counties earlier than possible than they currently planned to. So the issues facing some of our counties and the River District in general are rather daunting, I would say, financially. And we had a good discussion with the county commissioners on that very issue, more so than the, some of the water issues. But the other one that we had a discussion on was the in-stream flow issues with CWCB, because they were very concerned over essentially the CWCB and State Engineer's Office looking at calling out some of the historic but undecreed uses by the in-stream flows. So they are appreciative of what the River District is doing in working on those issues. So that's a big concern to the county, because we have a lot of stock water, stock ponds, stock watering within, central and western Garfield County that are subject to those. So I want to, implore the staff to hang in there at that, work with the CWCB and get a better resolution of that issue.
Hey, we will, and in fact, we'll be working with Commissioner Jackie Brown, who's here, and appreciate her taking the lead on that. And Steve, I'm actually hoping to come visit you on something related to this shortly. So, I do think it's a really critical issue for many of our water users, and it seems like there are some real common sense solutions. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can get there.
Okay. So now we want to take our break now and move into your report. Let's take a quick break. Let's take a quick break. Be back about 5:00 or 3 o'clock maybe, and we'll move into the general manager's report. Okay. Yeah.
I was wondering,
You had 0?
with a cold wind,
that wind just getting old.
and the dirt was blowing and.
Yes, sir.
You couldn't see the snow for the dirt.
Yeah.
Just
Okay. Well, we're into the general manager's report. Okay, we're an hour behind. Can you catch us up?
I don't think we're gonna catch up, but I am, our staff has worked hard on a lot of things, so I wanna try to give them time, a little bit of time to talk about each one fairly quickly. We've talked quite a bit about demand management, so I'm not gonna cover that, other than to say, we have taken our time in setting up the West Slope stakeholder work group process, and there've been a number of reasons for slow walking that. It does not mean that we're not going to do it. We will do it. As you could hear from the staff, Amy Alstek at the CRWCD, that process is not going to be done within the next 12 months, or frankly, I don't think 24 months. So we have time, and we still intend to do it because we do need to have some, try to develop some West Slope consensus around rules that we may want to see if, in fact, that program's going to be set up. So we are working on it, but I want you to know there have been a lot of discussions trying to make sure that we're not creating additional fatigue for no return of the participants in that discussion. Mr. Transit.
What happens, I mean, I was gonna ask this question and I could see it wasn't gonna do any good at state level. What happens if we go back into this drought, you know, we don't have another good winter and we're more like 17 and that kind of stuff? What happens as far as the state's concerned? Do you think, you know, they say they're gonna take all this time, but if the demand comes from downstream, what's gonna happen?
I think that it will create a greater sense of urgency, but the reality is that this is such a complex market that would have to be set up. It's going to take, it really is. It can. But could we see some steps being skipped? Yes. So we'll be ready for that.
Do you think it'll get so bad that there'll be a mandated situation to satisfy? I mean, I'm talking, we go into 3, 4, 5 years of drought.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if we hit 5 years like 2018, we would be looking at mandatory curtailment. And I think that's part of tomorrow's discussion with Kevin Ryan is to really ask him where he sees mandatory curtailment, how he intends to roll that out. Doesn't he want to roll that out before he actually has to, the rules for it, before he actually has to implement it? What's his schedule on that? Those are questions for him, because I think if we had that successive dry years, even a repeat of 2012, 2013 kind of thing, you'd see a lot more people moving that way and being aware of what's going to happen. That being said, remember our, phase 3 of the risk study. Right. It doesn't predict anything, but if you look at how the interim operating guidelines are working on Powell and Meade, if we run into that, we drop to a 7.48 release and we stay at it for quite some time. And so while it gets rid of that wonderful cushion that we have, it really does maintain some satisfaction for us finally at that level. Yeah. That actually maintaining it at 7.48 if we're down at those levels, oddly enough, will take care of the structural deficit. So if you think about it that way, there's actually and that has a lot to do. Just one of the things we're thinking and talking about a lot here on staff is how do you push it in interim guidelines a more realistic number of releases. Not much different, Mark, than what you were asking, but it's a touchy negotiating subject that doesn't do a lot of good talking about it in a big public meeting. So I think that, in Becky's defense, may have been why you got some of those weird answers. So I think, just so you know, it's not you are not alone in thinking about those issues at all.
I think they need to hear us say those kind of things in these public meetings so that they know, well, that could be.
Right. So I agree. If I can move off demand management, and the next item is the water bank work group, and Sonia is going to talk to us, but I want to take this opportunity to convey a potential great sadness on my part and the rest of the district's part.
No.
Ms. Chavez has been named as the sole finalist for the general manager of the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District position. They made a great find to our great detriment, and but they're still working with her, so we're hoping negotiations go sideways on that if you stay. And we won't hold it against you, Sonia. No, but we really are excited for Sonia, and so Sonia has been working with us on the water bank work group for quite some time. The great thing is that thanks to efforts by this board and some of our partners like Tri-State, the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District is now sending a representative to the water bank work group. And that hopefully will be Sonia in the future, so we'll have that continuity. But Sonia, if you want to, go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to say thank you all. I really have enjoyed my time with the River District and working with DK over the years and all of you folks. You know, I've only been on staff for 4 years, but I had been working with you closely for 12 years prior to that. So really it's like 15 years that I've been with you all. So thank you so much. It truly has been an honor, and you will continue to see me around. Absolutely. So, all right. So the Water Bank Work Group, as you saw, is continuing to meet. We had our first series of focus group meetings at each of the basins. We have study report outs from those and input that we received. And you kind of, I'm not sure how many of you actually got to go to the district annual seminar, but Doug Jevons of BBC also gave a really great overview and presentation on what we've been looking at and some of the results that he's seen. The goal of that first meeting was really to get a baseline economic view of each of the basins so that he can go forward with the economic analysis. And it was really a gut check of the information to make sure that it looked right, it felt right to people. So that's where we're at with that. The next meeting of the group is going to be, the focus group meeting is going to be targeted for early of 2020. The steering committee is going to meet early December, though, just to continue to work with Doug and go over information. Related to that, the next economic and local government work group meeting, the CRWCD, is on November 7th. And I've been asked to give a brief presentation on what's going on in the Western Slope, what studies have we been doing, what's the status of our knowledge. So I'll give a brief 15-minute presentation at that meeting on behalf of the River District and other West Slope water users. I did want to just give an update to the board, Andy, about the Water Smart Water Marketing Grant application that the River District submitted in July to the Bureau of Reclamation. We made a request for $315,000, and at our last meeting, we updated you on that and let you know that we were going to be doing that. But that will support potentially the continued efforts of the Water Bank Work Group economic studies, the phase 3D or 4, whatever we're going to call it, of the risk study, any efforts there, and also any of the demand management stakeholder outreach that Andy is planning in the basins that we represent. So other than that, did anybody have any questions for me?
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you.
And I'm going to keep asking this question. How soon will we be able to find a draft of the water bank, not the water bank work group?
Secondary impact.
Thank you. The secondary impact report.
I think Doug is anticipating probably a first draft findings in like April. And then that would go out for public comment and input. Yeah. So like April, I think his contract terminates the end of May.
Okay.
So I would say late March, early April.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you,
And
Sonia.
I'd like to express my appreciation for your work for the River District, initially as the coordinator and facilitator for the selenium control lower basin in Gunnison, and then generally for the Lower Gunnison Basin. I think you've done an excellent job. It's been an excellent face for the River District out there. So
Thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sonia. If we can next have Hunter come on up. The proposed approval of the Yampa River Fund Collaboration and Administration Agreement. Maybe Hunter can do a brief presentation on that, and if our Yampa directors have opinions on that, they might want to chime in as well. So.
Thanks. So the memo you have outlines the request for the River District to sign the Yampa River Fund collaboration and, actually now what is it? An administration agreement. So a little bit of background, the Yampa River Fund, it's an effort led by the TNC, the Nature Conservancy, to provide funds for river projects in the Yampa River Basin. At the core of this is an endowment that will provide a perpetual stream of funds for river projects. So currently that endowment is at about $3.5 million with a goal of $5 billion by its 5th year, so another 4.5 years. The purpose of the goal, to be quite honest, if you read some of the purpose and some of the language, it's a little bit vague, but where I think it does get clear is it outlines 3 specific project types that are approved. Those are reservoir releases, habitat restoration, and infrastructure improvements. Within that agreement, in order to change what those approved projects are or any addition, would require unanimous consent of the board. As a signatory, we would be a board member, so in theory, we would have, we would be able to veto any problematic changes there. One note on that, this is a non-binding agreement, so there's nothing that says if they want to change the project types, we can absolutely prevent that. But it does, by signing the agreement, it gives us a seat at the table, and my assessment is that it would be politically problematic for them to change those project types without the consent of all the board members. So in a nutshell, the project types are consistent with our River District mission, and participating gives us a seat at the table. Directors Gray or Munger, do you guys have anything to add?
Go ahead. Several of us were involved in formulating what this would look like, and just the same as Hunter has outlined, why I think we should sign it is we have a seat at the table. Brock County's done it, Moffett County's done it, all the municipalities in our county have signed on. It has pretty broad support, and I think it will do some good things. The one worrisome thing is it's non-binding, but I think they've made a good faith effort, and it would be really problematic for anyone to change the focus at this point, I think. So I think there's some good things that come out of it. We could get some infrastructure improvements and maybe sell some water for other purposes out of our reservoir.
One of I think the key things that Tom and Doug and others have pushed for in there is that to the extent that they're talking about providing or paying for water to be supplemented into the stream flow, it's to come from storage facilities, not from drying up agriculture. And so that's one of the project types that's specified in the agreement, and I think that's when Hunter talks about it being consistent with our board direction, that really is the key to it, I think. And correct me, the three of you, if I state that wrong, but that's my understanding.
That was the big point that we worked on. There's a lot of money, guys. I mean, it'll bring in $300,000 or $400,000 when it gets to $5 million every year. And they've agreed to use our basin implementation plan as a guideline for the types of projects. So, I think we need to be on board.
Mr. Munger.
So yeah, I'll just follow up on Hunter's comments. This is a great thing. It's a voluntary thing. It's non-binding, but I think I've been advocating for this all along. I mean, we have recreationalists and environmentalists that want to have water. Well, somebody's got to pay for it. Someone's got to come out of somewhere. And so it makes for us, from my being on the board of the Upper Yampa, we have water there to sell, and this will be a great opportunity for us to sell water to the downstream users and to put it in the stream for beneficial uses, and we help with operation expenses and the rest. And so we were, I think, able to add in there to, you know, some ag uses as well, because in our county and Moffett County both feel that, just like as Director Mitchell talked about, our ag is still very, very important to both of our counties, and we still want to preserve that, but, you know, we're sitting on 100-year-old infrastructure with no monies, and cows are making same thing now as they were in 1985. Isn't that right, Bill? Somewhere in there. So, you know, so anyhow, it's a great opportunity, and I think it's a great opportunity I think the big benefited interests here are going to be the recreational and environmental water that's going to have some monies going into it. So, yeah, I think it's a great thing. I would move that we sign on to that.
Yeah, motion by Mr. Munger, is there a second? Second by Mr. Gray. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the General Manager's report is retention of the auditor for the 2019 audit. Ian has put a memo in the packet. If you have questions, Ian would be happy to come up and sit. It is your retention of the auditor. This auditor was the auditor that we used for the audit of 2018. Did a great job, came in on budget, on time. They are very professional. There is, as expressed in Ian's memo, a potential increase in cost due to the fact that we're receiving so many federal funds. We have a single issue audit coming our way under federal law, so there is always a price to be paid for taking federal money. It has helped our partners down in the Lower Gunnison project area, but that is something that we have to pay to have compliance with federal law. But we would ask for you to move to approve the staff's request there.
Is there a motion? A motion by Alfie, a second by Trampy. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you.
Roundtable Summit update, won't say anything more than what's in the packet. We did have a few board members there as well. It was a well-done event by the CWCD. And if you have questions, certainly we're happy to talk about them, but we are just trying to move through this if we can. Next, we have the Colorado River hydrology update. We have Dave Kanzer and Don Meyer.
Tag team, hey?
And there are, hopefully we'll have the TVs up and running here, we'll see.
I'll make this quick. I'm going to save the Wolfer and Elkhead part of the hydrology memo that you guys got for tomorrow. So we'll just talk about big basin hydrology.
One more, Ian.
He's got it.
So we're going to tag team this real quickly, and this is the image out of your memo that Don and I put together. You all lived through this, a rapidly drying situation. These are the monthly precipitation from June through August. So all the hot colors mean well below average across the entire basin with a few exceptions. By the way, if you want to go back, the little blue and purple splotch there in our area really is, coming out of that really wet March, April, May, and then we had this late June set of storms that spilled Granby, spilled Windy Gap's 20,000 acre feet that they pumped up. So that anomaly.
At about $50 an acre foot, wasn't it? Or?
Pretty obvious right there, yeah. Good. And September was just a little bit better, especially in the upper basin. Don just pulled this off. You can also see in the lower basin remnants of some tropical, subtropical storms that they benefited from, but for the majority of our water producing areas, pretty dry. And of course, we're living through fires, and we know that.
There, the Gunnison 0 to 30%.
So, not good at all. But because we have the big reservoirs, here's a look at the trace of Lake Powell over the years. And if you take your eye here forward, the 2-year planning look ahead. Obviously, we had a huge recovery this year, coming out and staying in this. Between the blue and the yellow is called the upper elevation balancing tier. So we are in that range between 7.48 and 9 million acre feet releases. But this year in particular, this is the artifact of our high inflows. Looking forward, the way that the elevations at Meade and Powell interact, we are projecting an 8.23 year going forward in 2020. That means, provided no change in April, they have always a look back of what happened this upcoming winter with a potential April adjustment. Without an April adjustment, we'd be at 8.23 in this planning study. With that, and with about a 90% inflow forecast next year about this time, we're almost the exact same position. As you look 2 years out, obviously the uncertainty grows. Oops. And with 100% inflow and a 9 million acre foot release, we actually continue to grow and recover Lake Powell, but not in a significant way.
I just want to say we lost about 2 million acre feet in that 24-month outlook between August and October, so 2 months of dry, basically.
But again, the operating tier won't change, so those decisions and the relationship between Lake Powell and Lake Meade, now shown here, dictate the release pattern. And in Lake Meade, we're in this tier 0, which is now mandatory under the DCP. That means that Arizona and Nevada combined take a shortage or take less than they could by 200,000 acre feet. And you can see we've been in this range, but now it's real because they are required to do so. Oh, this timing is interesting, but so we're going to be bouncing between, we're staying within, again, what is now being referred to as tier 0, and not seeing much change, even with a 9.0 million acre foot release in 2021 as projected. You can see they're headed to the next real tier 1 should this play out. Right at that boundary here at this intersection of the yellow line. So you can see it bouncing back up. They make the determination based on December, and obviously this is October projection of 2021. So they may skate another year without shortage in that tier 1, but they'll still be in tier 0 and still actively conserving. This is something that John just provided to follow up the conversation that we had with the CWCB representatives. The 10-year running average that we always talk about in the blue.
Yep.
And you can see the 2 critical thresholds. 75 over 10 is the red, and 82.5 in the darker line. You can see projecting forward, here we are in 2019. Going forward, assuming that we're at 7.48, we are still well above the 75 over 10, and in fact, still above 82.3 through the interim period going into 2026. So it gives us some comfort vis-a-vis those thresholds. Anything can happen between now and then, but again, the way that our agreement runs, we are okay through the interim period. The dots are shown as the annual delivery, which includes the real equalization release and small accretions that occur below the outlet. So in other words, there's seepage and there's the PREA that comes in, and those are the real compact flows, these orange dots. So
that's assuming 7.4 rate for
from 2021 forward.
Yeah.
Yes, see those dots there?
That was just an assumption if you had a kind of
Worst
a worst-case scenario going
Yeah.
forward, what would happen? That's highly.
And that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you're going to have greater releases than that.
Yeah.
So that hopefully gives some comfort, and obviously decreases the pressure, I would say, somewhat on the demand management conversation, if you want to look at it that way. I'll turn it over to Don for these next slides.
Gosh, yeah, so the drought monitor for the west, still lingering drought in eastern New Mexico, Arizona, Four Corners area, basically, that's severe drought. I think we had a bit of a rebound a couple of months ago, and again, this dry condition since June, it has just brought us back into the drought, severe drought condition in the Four Corners area.
Prior to that, this whole state was white for the first time in probably 20 years. So now we're right back into it.
Okay, the three-month, half-month lead time forecast for temperature and precipitation. Temperature on the left, above average in the Four Corners area, kind of bleeding into Colorado, and above average precipitation, at least in eastern and somewhat in western Colorado. So that's I'm always reticent to put a whole lot of money in the bank towards these things, but above average temperature and precipitation is forecast for beginning winter. And that's all we have. Questions? Well, thank you guys, really appreciate the update. If you can make it snow or rain or something, please.
Yeah, we do the rain dance.
Turning on the cloud seeding generators here after November 1st.
Yeah. Mike, Itell, if you want to come on up on the Grand Lake Clarity Adaptive Management Update. Mike continues to be our face in a lot of these cooperative efforts up in the Grand County area.
Good afternoon, directors. I don't know if I really need to have this on today. Seem to be striking out with the plug now. There we go. Anyways, here we are today, Grand Lake Clarity MOU. It's one of multiple parallel processes that are involving the CBT project. Grand Lake Clarity MOU has got Grand County Northwest Council of Governments, River District, the Bureau of Reclamation, and Northern Water. CBT, it's really our founding legislation that created the River District. It's based on this project. The MOU project has been going on. This is our 4th season of operating, and generally speaking, it operates from July through Labor Day, which was deemed to be the recreational season in Grand Lake. And they're really trying to promote alternatives through management that might keep the Grand Lake clarity up and not have it degrade. And what they've learned over the course of the last few years is there is you can affect the water quality in Shadow Mountain via operations. We can't really tell whether these are going to be permanent and how effective they are. But as you can see in my memo, that last table that I put in there was supplied by Northern Colorado, and it looks back at a number of years in operation. I'm really going to focus on 2016 to today, and for the Grand Lake, really trying to keep clarity close to 3.8 meters or better, and then you want to have a minimum of a 2.5. And in the past, I've done show and tell with you all. Don't really think it's necessary today, but what you can see over the last 3 out of 4 years, we've maintained pretty good water quality in Grand Lake through a variety of hydrologic conditions. We've had dry, medium, and really wet this year. I don't know what more to say about it, but it seems to be working. And what they do primarily, rather than just pumping pumping plant at a steady rate, they, excuse me about that, they have been cycling it during the weekdays and weekends. So they turn it down on the weekend and then ramp up FAR pumping plant really high during the weekdays. And what they're using is the operational 1.5 foot in Grand Lake, because they can stop pumping and allow water to go through Adams Tunnel and use the elevation in Grand Lake to maintain that. For whatever reason, it seems to be having a positive response on the water quality in Grand Lake.
How does it do with the docks in Grand Lake?
Say that again?
How does that do with the docks?
The docks, well, it keeps it within the Senate Document 80's elevation, so
Okay,
they should be okay. Shouldn't be effective. And some of you, Director Stiegelmeyer and Director Chandler Henry, took part on the Northern's tour of the CBT project just a couple weeks ago, and it was quite informative. And they kind of released this table there. And the only thing I'm going to say as far as the table is the period between 2005
to 2015. That data, while it is data with view scopes, it's not quite collected exactly the way we do today. So it's thrown in there. Folks in Grand County think it's a little speculative to use that table. I used it really more as an inference for you all to look at it and look at, we're collecting a lot of data on an annual basis. And really the SECI depths seem to be maintaining. So we've hit the goals 3 out of 4 years, and then 3 out of the last 11 has been random hydrology. But during those periods, we really weren't doing anything to actively affect the water quality going into Shadow Mountain. So, and the other piece that I'll say is, along with us and Northern, the Bureau, I think there's probably not too many sites in the state of Colorado that's real-time sampling water quality on a daily basis, hourly basis practically, and trying to use that data to see what it does. And we go out of a weekly report every week, get on the phone for about an hour and a half, and quite honestly, the gentleman, Matt, who's doing it for Northern, we kind of joke he's had it easy because he's been there for 3 years, and we seem to maintain the quality for 3 years. We don't think it's really him, but the reality is, I kind of say we kind of maybe stumbled on an operational tool that may actually work better than we thought it would. But the jury's still out. It's a little early in the process to tell if it works. The only other piece that I would state is through this process, I've got to know a lot of local folks, and there are actual lay persons that come to these meetings on their own nickel, own dime, that live on the lakes, and they provide input to this. And it's been actually very influential to the folks. The town of Grand Lake has their town manager, but having these local entities come in and help out and just kind of weigh in on what they see on a daily basis seems to be effective. This process is going to end in 2022. Whether the Bureau will continue to do this with us, I'm not sure. They'll stay part of this program as we go through with the state water quality standards. But as you can see, it strikes a number of our strategic initiatives, and it also is the kind of convergence of water quality and water supply projects right now for us in Grand Lake and the upper basin. Largest Trans Mountain diversion, and the Bureau's working with us, and that's really all I have to say. If you have any questions, happy to take any.
I'm curious if you know the status of the local Grand Lake group that was pushing for the federal status for Grand Lake.
So you're looking for the outstanding waters?
Yeah.
Yes, so they're still involved, and they actually take part in the phone calls on this. They're not an active member, so they don't have a seat at the table per se, but they kind of give feedback to the local entities, and those are some of the local stakeholders I'm talking about. But they are directly involved. That's called Outstanding Grand Lake, and they kind of have a slightly separate agenda than what we're trying to focus on. But they are there, and they are present, and they are expressing their concerns.
And their satisfaction to some degree?
I think right now all of us are really scratching our heads, to be honest with you. As the summer progressed, having a lot of water seems to be effective, but after last year's year, where everybody expected Shadow Mountain to turn into, one gentleman calls it frog water who lives on it. It really gets putrid and green, lots of vegetation. This year we had lots of vegetation, but no active algae blooms, and that seems to be really effective. But they're there. I wouldn't say they're expressing that we put a home run yet or not, but that's about it.
Well, thanks, Mike, appreciate it. Keep the lake clear.
You say keep it blue.
And I was kind of hoping we'd get a SECI disc again, but
I'm happy to bring all those if you like that. I don't know.
I mean, in my college years, we actually we made a SECI disc out of a Frisbee. I mean, it's the right size. We just took a Frisbee and we made quadrants with 2 black and 2 white quadrants. And
was that a drinking game or?
No, that was measuring the depth in some lakes. And yeah, I mean, it's a very simple. It's one of the most simple water quality measurement tools you can use.
Excellent.
It's been around over 100 years.
All right. Next is Mr. Courier to talk about amending our risk study phase 3 contract. And John, take it away.
When this board got together with Southwest Board in May 2018 in Montrose and authorized the risk study phase 3, you authorized $65,000, Southwest authorized $65,000. it was fairly, we had a fairly good idea that the outreach that was gonna be required, and then questions raised by basin roundtables were gonna come up that were gonna be excessive, in excess of the scope. So at that meeting, the boards talked about, okay, soliciting funds from various water user entity groups within the various basins to potentially fund this additional work. And so really that's what we're asking here today, is that we amend John Karen's contract to add a year to it, so it'd run through December 2020, add $50,000 to it, and the purpose of that would be to fund some of these in the rearview mirror outreach efforts, some future outreach efforts, and then to fund some of this downscaling into the other basins. And so then we also said, well, gosh, our river district, it would be nice if we threw an additional $5,000 of our own money into that pot as well. So that's simply the request, is that we add a year to his contract, extend it by $50,000, extend the river district's contribution to it from $65,000 to $70,000. Director Alvey.
So where's the rest of the 50,000 coming from then?
Well, the 50,000 would come from these various user entity groups. Southwestern, for example, went out and probably carried, solicited funds from various entities in Southwest District at the end of last year, and have $12,000 that they can apply to future work asked by their roundtables. We're asking the same request from entities in the Yampa White and the Gunnison, as we discussed.
And the Colorado.
And the Colorado.
Okay, I just wanted to.
So we're not funding the full $50,000?
No, we're not funding.
We're doing 5.
Yes, that's what our request to you is. It depends on if you don't want to, let us know. That's what we're looking for.
Director Munger.
So I'm all right with the 5, I guess. So do we have a budget on who else is gonna be? I mean, since we all wear, I wear about 3 more hats.
It's not gonna come from the every.
And I haven't seen any requests yet, so.
That's a good question. I think what's asked of, Upper Gunnison has asked for some work. The whole Gunnison Roundtable has asked for some work. That's probably $10,000-ish total. I think the work in the Southwest is probably gonna stay within the 12,000 that they've gotten. We haven't had a discussion yet really with the Yampa White Roundtable about what a scope of additional work y'all might wanna see would look like yet.
Okay.
So
if we don't ask for more work, we probably might not
Yeah.
get more money. So.
That's a quick way of saying the $50,000 was a little bit of a swag.
Okay, that's great.
But if you're, for instance, the Gunnison Roundtable is asking for some work, we are asking entities in the Gunnison Basin to pay for that work. Upper Gunnison is chipping in some money. I think Tom has been chatted with some others as well. So it's an easier way to get it done. And these are, follow-up tests are relatively small in terms of the total scope.
My goal is to go through one set of follow-up tasks with the various roundtables and then call it quits on phase 3, and then we can figure out if and how we might scope a phase 4.
In the project, yes.
Okay, Munger, again?
I don't know, I was just gonna move staff recommendation, so.
Peter is.
Peter?
Just one comment briefly, and you may have covered this, John, already, but the extensive outreach that we conducted on the existing part of this scope of work was a valuable exercise, but it was also an expensive exercise. And so that is one of the reasons why, we're collecting money to do this next phase, and also trying to do it sort of as a one work effort as much as we can with a definitive end. With respect to the staff recommendation on the $50,000, if we could qualify that slightly to the extent that, that the contract would be up to $50,000 or that amount which we're able to collect from our constituents' contributions.
Well, I would say we could amend the contract by $50,000, but we would only expend that amount that we collect.
Not to exceed.
Yeah, not to exceed, yeah, not to exceed.
So we have a motion, we have a second. We have a second? Yeah, we have a motion by Munger, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Winery. Any comments from Southwest? Laura?
Our board will be considering, an additional match at the December meeting, that hasn't been discussed. However, we have, received those commitments from our local partners, so we're ready to start using their money.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you. Well, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any further comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Next on our report is an update on our health insurance costs. Audrey has some information, I think, in addition to what's in the memo. Usually Audrey brings us positive news about our benefit expenses.
Doesn't seem like I'm always bearing positive news. So at our budget workshop in September, I didn't really have a lot of information. I kind of threw out a rough guess of a 10% increase in premiums, thinking that was a conservative guess. Well, I was wrong. We still don't have it totally finalized, but I've been spending a lot of time in the last 3 weeks on phone calls and webinars and individual meetings with our healthcare group. And as of now, we are looking at probably a 23.6% increase in our premium. And some of that came with discussions on the executive committee about how do we keep the healthcare group going for at least one more year. And there's a couple districts within that group that are in some lower cost areas or have had much lower claims, and so they were higher risk of leaving the group. And so the higher utilizers, I'll say, within that group have elected to take a higher percentage increase in the premiums, offering those other couple districts a lower percent in order to keep them, because alternatively it would have been the dissolution of the healthcare group. So what that means is that we will be over our 5% average that the board adopted in their policy in 2011. And so we're going to eliminate the HSA contribution, and then we're also going to implement some sort of cost share for employees for their dependents for the health insurance. So I don't have those exact numbers, although really the board has delegated that authority to the general manager to figure that out. So Andy and I will be working over the next month or so to kind of figure out what that is. But it does mean, a larger impact to our employees. But I think that at this point it is what it is, and happy to stay in the healthcare group. Next year, though, we're all going to be spending a lot more time figuring out what the long-term future is. The River District on its own would not do so well. In the fully insured market, we'd probably be looking at 30% increases on a yearly basis. So staying in the group is still our best option. The other change is I got an update on the salary increase pool. It did decrease from 3.5 to 3.3%. So that's also reflected in the budget. Any questions?
Can I just want to follow with Audrey. I think the board has committed to providing a good benefit package for the employees, and the employees are very appreciative of that. It has allowed us to retain employees and frankly recruit employees. We're dealing with the same thing everybody else in the marketplace is dealing with when it comes to health insurance. Over time, the district's contribution to the HSA has shrunk from, if I'm not mistaken, 10 years ago, was it 2,400 an employee? Is that?
Yeah, roughly.
Right. So a significant employee contribution to the employee's health savings account, down to what you're hearing Audrey say, which will likely be zero next year, and then covering the employee and the premiums for the dependents completely to having employees subsidized dependent coverage. We are working on different ways to implement that, to try to be sensitive to the impact that has on employees in comparison to their take-home pay. So we are trying to figure out a way to make that equitable within the district. But it is a challenge, and it is different than what the district has been doing in the past. In a competitive labor market, we are looking for employees, and it does and will have an impact on our ability to at least attract new employees. But the board has passed a policy. It is a governing policy, and we are following that policy to keep the increase of the health insurance costs to 5% or less on a rolling 5-year average, because that's what the board has directed me to do, and so we are doing that.
And one observation I might make is one of the consulting firms I was with early on, HDR, which is very, conservative, as Angie knows, Omaha-based firm. They actually had differential rates by for the same coverage, by salary, and the higher the salary individual, the higher the rate they paid for the same plan. It would be easier to implement under a large, like a 5,000 person firm, but and this came from a very conservative engineering organization, but they actually recognized the differential impact that the same rate had across income structures. So,
well, that's what we're.
I know, yeah, and I think that could be, from a right-wing perspective, I'd really support that.
All right, well, great.
But yeah, Mr. Alvey, yeah.
So, what's the long-range plan? If this is what we're seeing, it sounds like we're hanging on by a thread to keep this going for another year. What about the year after and the year after and so on? I mean, this sounds like a really critical problem.
It is a critical problem. When the executive committee met earlier, and of the healthcare group is what I'm referring to, at the end of May, things were looking better then, and we were still looking at what the long-term viability was, mostly because our premiums are not really competitive. We're in a very high-cost area. Between Aspen, Glenwood, Vail is kind of the makeup of our district, and we can't really recruit other districts, and we've been trying to. And so we haven't been growing, and so, when you don't grow, the risk is the same, and when you have a really bad claims year like we did, you just get hit with these big increases. But at the time, we thought really, because of that, we're still protected in the group. We want to try to do our best to stay in there. That option is not off the table. It's possible that we could turn around and have an incredible year. And one of the things that I didn't mention is that if you look at the history of the groups, it started in 2000. It seems to kind of cycle. Every 4 or 5 years, we have a really bad year, and it's kind of, the worst case scenarios, everything happens at the same time. And so we've had, the last big increase we had was in 2014, and it was a 25% increase in premiums then. So then after that, we had a flat renewal the following year. So it's possible that we could continue to maintain this and reevaluate on a year-to-year basis. Other than that, frankly, the River District, we wouldn't really have a lot of options. We'd be looking at the fully insured market until our health and demographics got into a place where we would be accepted into one of these larger pools, like Special Districts Association has a pool that we may be able to get into. Those are subject to underwriting, though, so there's no guarantee. The fully insured market is going to be an option for us. But like I said, that's kind of, you're looking at 30% increase is a normal thing in the fully insured market. So I don't have a great answer for you long term. It'll probably continue to take up a lot of my time. I did personally look at what if, let's say we gave all of our employees some money and said, go to the private market. I was looking, the cheapest one that I could get was around $2,000 for my age and my family's age. And that was, I think, like a $6,000 individual deductible, $12,000 family deductible. So, and then the best plan was like $3,200. So even
That's per month, right?
per month, yeah. Even with what the River District's premiums are, it's still going to be better for our employees than it's going to be out in the private individual market.
Mr. Munger.
So to follow up on Director Alvey's question and comment, I guess probably in our working plan for this upcoming year, it sounds like, I think we ought to relook at that 5% discussion, because we know for a fact, all of us know that health insurance, health costs inflation are over 9%. And so we're just gonna keep digging a hole if we're gonna be raising at 5. And so, I mean, pretty soon, they're gonna be paying us, I don't know. So, but anyhow, I guess I would be supportive of that. And so the other thing I wanted to, since I had the floor here, so we're county, we're finishing up our budget too, and we actually increased salaries by the CPI. And tomorrow, I think, we're looking at CPI being 1.75 versus 3.5 versus to 3.3. So that kind of a little bit something to trade off too by using the different index versus CPI index. So, but I guess my comment closing would just make sure that we look forward at maybe that policy that was determined in 11, whether that's still appropriate with our current life situations.
Mr. Vandenbrink.
My county commissioners that I report to will make me want to make sure that I share that there are counties that have seen a pretty flatline budget as well. And when they see a significant increase to an entity that's collecting taxes from their county with a CPI and benefit structure like we have here, and we see wages maintaining very flat for the past 5 years, that's something to take in consideration as you want to move forward and have a sit down with my county commissioners, because they're going to bring it to your attention. And they're going to let you know their feelings on that, and rightfully so. Because right now they're looking at, flat revenues for this past year just for Rio Blanco County, but staff is not looking at getting any sort of a pay raise again. Rangeley for the first time was actually looking at one happening this year, where over the past several years, I think 5 years, they haven't had one yet. So be mindful of that, please.
I would say, Alex, so we are very mindful of that and aware, and I think, it's one of these tensions that is within the district that we see every day, that you see.
Very hard.
We've got counties where the cost of living is just skyrocketing, and wage growth is extremely high, and then we have counties where it's not happening that way, and we have counties that are extraction-based industries where we're seeing them just plummet. And I mean, Dave and his commissioners were talking about that. You guys, Moffett County, we are very aware. I mean, I trying to strike that balance is a difficult one. I would just go back to the fact that I'm happy to talk to any county commissioners about this, because I think if I can't defend it, then we shouldn't be doing it. But I really do believe that in order to have an effective voice on water on the West Slope, we've got to have the ability to attract the best people, and it is hard to do that, as all governments know.
We don't deny that. I don't deny that. I understand how this is going. But also when you look at CPI is not necessarily true to scale, because we can't get groceries in Rangeley. So we're looking at a 2-hour, 4-hour round trip just to get a bag of groceries. That adds to your cost of living that is not reflected within that CPI. You also look at your medical insurance. Our medical insurance premiums are substantially higher than what you experience here, because you have medical facilities readily available like this. So
actually, Garfield County was grouped within what was called the resort counties of Summit, Eagle, and Pickens County for rate setting. And I'm not sure about this year, but historically, since the last 4 or 5 years, they have been the highest, not in the state, but in the nation. And so, Audrey is tasked with a very difficult job, dealing with, health insurance rates that are the highest in the nation. And, it is untenable is an untenable position, but we have to live with it. We're located here. We need to recognize it. We need to live with it. And I second Doug Munger's, suggestion that we look at, that adjustment in the future. We need to find a way to cover this and to cover the employees and keep good employees.
Yes.
Ms. Chandler Henry.
I'm just going to support that as well. I really think we need to take a look at that policy, trying to balance what's fair throughout the counties. But I really think with the challenges that the River District is facing with demand management and curtailment and Trans Mountain diversions, that we've got really wonderful staff and we've got to be able to keep them. And I know what a struggle it is, even with high benefit packages. You just can't keep folks. And I think the cost to the western slope of losing the folks that we have now is going to be higher than going to 10% on insurance.
Thank you for what you're doing on this, Audrey. I know you never expected to become a health insurance expert 15 years ago when you came here, 12 years ago, did you? Yeah. Yeah, I know. Thank you.
All right.
I'd like to make an observation,
By all means.
General Manager, that the staff presentations that we've seen these last hour or so really demonstrate, I think, the depth and the breadth of the staff and the involvement that we have within the entire district geographic boundary. We had presentations from pretty much each of our areas, with the exception of White River, which we had a very good discussion of what the staff is doing to help with White River. So I think it really demonstrates that depth and breadth of the staff involvement. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. And I take the approach that the staff involved should be reporting, not me. It's titled General Manager's Report because that's historically what it's been, but it's much more effective if you hear from the staff who are actually on the ground doing the work. So we'll keep doing that. Thank you. And speaking of that, Mr. Courier, I think you have a service award for a gentleman by the name of Hunter Causey, who some people think just got here yesterday.
Yeah.
But
You, 1 year anniversary.
I was just thinking this is so apropos, just given this discussion we just had. 5 years ago, it was my privilege to pick up the phone and say, Hunter, we'd like to offer you a job at the River District. And the reason that Hunter rose to the top was because, one, we knew he was a good engineer. Two, he obviously showed a lot of good leadership potential. He's a good communicator. He was just the cream of that crop. And he has proven that every day for the last 5 years. And I've just been able to watch his ability and his ability to take things and run with them and handle them just improve day by day over the last 5 years. I mean, case in point, we just turned over all of the day-to-day operations maintenance of Wolford and Elkhead to Hunter. Now, Ray and I are more consultants to Hunter.
Does he pay you?
Decision makers, he's the decision maker. And, it's just been a natural great growth. And Hunter, I am so pleased that you are here and it's been awesome. Thank you very
That was very generous, John.
It's the truth.
Thank you. One question, does this mean I'm not one of the new guys anymore?
Not yet.
Yep, not yet.
Gotta hire some more guys.
I think like everybody else here, I feel really fortunate to be able to wake up and come to work at a place where I really, even at a personal level, believe in the mission of where I work. And I just feel really appreciative for that and have a really nice boss. So. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. Alicia, you're the keeper of the shirts. Want to make some sort of announcement about that? Yeah.
Sure. As you all know, we have a new logo, and we are offering activewear shirts for our board members. They're upstairs, both women's shirts and men's shirts, in front of our new administrative assistant's office, Lizzie Borkenhagen. There's a clipboard. You can try on shirts, pick your size, and we'll get one to you if you're interested.
Okay. Thank you. Yep.
Well, I just want to point out that we are back on track,
Boy.
timing-wise.
Yeah.
Actually, an hour of those 2 hours was anticipated to talk about demand management, which you did with Commissioner Mitchell and your
Yes.
team. So thank you for having that conversation with the CWCD. Last item on the agenda for today is a discussion about a potential emergency grant program. There is a recommendation there. You won't hurt my feelings or anyone on staff's feelings if you say no. But I listened carefully to the board and I heard concerns about not having any kind of ability to assist people who had emergency situations with their ditches. And I heard board members voice significant concerns about the impacts of irresponsible grant programs and on neighbors and others. And there were questions about whether it was a good use of funds. So I tried, and I will tell you that Hunter actually worked with me on this, but I took it off his plate because he was on vacation. So to the extent that you don't agree with it, it's mine. To the extent you like it, it was Hunter's contribution, I'm sure. But we tried to really balance what we heard, and I think the bullet points on page 2 of the memo highlight what we were trying to go after. And they're number one, if we're to adopt an emergency grant program, funds are only available in a year in which you actually appropriate the funds. So it's a real simple answer. If you never appropriate the funds, we don't have it. The district will only consider emergency grant applications twice a year. Timing, March and September, I've heard some concern that, gee, that's not flexible enough. I will tell you that having a little bit of a hurdle in getting money from a federal or from a government agency is not such a bad thing. People find a way to solve their own emergencies if they know they've got to take time and actually apply for it. You guys obviously have the right to waive that. If there's a true emergency, we can handle it at the July meeting or at some other meeting if you were to call a meeting for that purpose. I think the one thing I would say in here, we've got the criteria in the guidelines that we would use. But the key here is, regardless of the amount, I would like this board to retain the ability to determine whether or not you want to give a specific grant. So I'm not asking you to delegate that to me, because I think on something like this, in keeping with our historic grant program, it should not be a staff-driven or staff decision. Even though generally you have deferred to me or to the general manager a certain level of discretion, I just think this is worthy of the board's consideration. One other point is suggest here that from listening to the board that anyone who is applying needs to be able to show that they are contributing at least 50% of the funds to the ditch repair. And that's not in kind, because frankly, I think people can game in kind in a grant application. It's amazing how expensive an hour of your own backhoe can cost if you're applying for a grant. The idea being you've got to self-fund it or go get a loan and then come to us and say, you guys, I really, really need your help, but I am putting my own money in this. And then they do need to provide some evidence that the emergency situation that they're asking for relief from was not caused from their own lack of maintenance or negligence. Now, that's going to be really kind of hard for us to determine what that is, but on a case-by-case basis, we may actually be able to have something show up where it is clear that a ditch owner knew their ditch was washing out and did nothing about it. So those are the general highlights of the guidelines, and I guess I would open the discussion up to you. Again, happy to go in any direction, but I wanted to give you something to talk about with this program.
Comments?
This looks like it strikes a balance to me.
Yep. Provide some sideboards. Dr. Prescott?
The way I read that 50% requirement, it would have to be 50% of the applicant's personal resources. And they would not qualify if they came forward with 50% from another granting
NRC
entity.
has
Correct.
money, yeah.
Correct. 50% of the applicants, 50% of the funds, of the cost of the repair would come from the applicant. And again, professional grantees figure out a way to pull in funds from all sorts of sources and not provide their own money. I thought I heard pretty clearly from the board that they wanted to see, you wanted to see
Skin in the game.
skin in the game if we're gonna give these kind of grants.
I like that.
Yeah. Yes.
Do we have or do we need a definition of emergency, or is that just case by case? Somebody says
Kind
it's
of
an
a case by
emergency.
case
we-
Yeah.
situation.
Well, I'm probably the lone proponent of a much more flexible and easy program. And this is, I wouldn't object to this, but I do think that if we're talking about an emergency program, and then we've structured it, it's beginning to be a whole lot like going to the state for WSRF grant funds, which is counter to the intent of the program. We're talking about the ditch blew out, wasn't anything we did wrong, it was an act of nature or God or whatever. We need some help to get this program underway. I would prefer to see some of that flexibility included in this. I agree that there needs to be many of these sideboards, but to me, it seems as if we're kind of defeating the purpose of an emergency fund.
Well, in order to do that, President Alvey, I would say that this board would most likely, in order for us to be actually flexible about it, would be to provide discretion to me and the staff to determine that. And I guess you can hear the hesitancy of my voice on that one, given the nature of emergency grants and.
Who can cry the best of you?
Yeah. I'll just give you an example. I mean, this year, we had Pilot Rock Ditch in Delta County who did comply with our request for documentation and evidence and what they were doing. We had 3 other ditches that blew out and that approached us, the owners or the lessees or somebody involved in them approached us and wanted money. They made really good cases to our, and I'm gonna say this with respect, to our bleeding heart staff members who then came to me and said, man, we gotta help these people. And on my own, I said, well, that guy sounds like he doesn't really own the ditch. I want the landowner to sign off on this. I want the owner of the property of the water right to sign off on it. I want them to show us where they're actually spending money and are they, and they kind of disappeared. And so there's a certain level of accountability if you're asking for public money that we ought to be able to expect. And that's where I am is that you can pull on heartstrings pretty well, but then when you actually have to give some documents and some evidence of what's going on. I mean, I will tell you, I've seen NRCS grants where people went in and improved and realigned ditches over someone else's property without the landowner's consent. And it was a lot more expensive for that grantee to go through the court system later, and so we don't, we've got to, there is work, there even in these emergency situations, there's some level of request. But I'm just saying, Tom, if you want us to do that, that means it's a delegation of authority to me.
And I agree that's probably the case, and that is, in my understanding, the case previously. We had a dollar amount, and I don't remember what it was. Might have been 25,000.
That's where we are today.
Yeah.
With everything
It's under
else,
the general manager's discretion, and we entrust the general manager with having the wisdom to ask the very questions that you asked. And that seems to me to be a workable way to go at it. But
Mr. Gray.
So, not the emergency grant, but I want to throw something out there that we just started into, and we don't know how it's going to work. But because of the complications of the SRF grant process, you have to be an entity with your own attorney to almost get through the process.
Yep.
And so we haven't approved it by the whole roundtable, but on our grant committee, we're contemplating going through the Upper Yampa Conservancy District with a lump sum grant and let them disperse it. And the CRWCD has agreed in concept to that, let's give it a try. But the Upper Yampa doesn't go all the way down the Yampa, it's a limited district. And I'm just sitting here listening and saying, if this works, maybe we should, as a river district, contemplate going to the roundtables or to the state, through the state process and being the purveyor of grants, and the criteria would have to meet their criteria. I understand the way we're talking about it. And it's not a success yet, but it might be a possibility to allow what Tom wants to do, and we all do, allow people who really need some help and can make a good case to get some of that state money.
Marty?
But we haven't altered, Andy, the general manager's discretionary funds. I mean, that's not what this is about.
Well, no, I'm saying that I wouldn't, I'm actually telling you to don't give me this discretionary on grants, because historically, if you look at our small grant program, those were all $15,000 or less, and that had been at the board level decision as part of the grant program. So if you were to adopt a different grant program, an emergency grant program, and give me the authority, delegate that authority to me, that's within the prior delegation of authority. I just want to really point out that that is a change as to how we have handled grants in particular. And I'll do that, and I'll be a watchdog and probably piss a few people off in the process, and that's fine.
You'd rather have all of us piss folks off.
But it is, Tom's right, it is a cumbersome process that I'm recommending here. And so, and again, I'm fine with changes to it, so I.
But you're also correct on the public funds.
Yeah.
And the accountability, and it precludes people who keep going back to the same well. We're professional people at this to figure out how to end up with all the money, and the guy who really needs the money is standing out there going, how the hell did that happen, and I can't get there, because we didn't hire this firm or that firm or have all the documentation. And if you look at it, it's the same people keep coming back, and really, to me, an emergency piece is if somebody has that piece, they complete that case, walk in here on their own accord, and say, I'm really putting my money in, this is where I'm at, because if you think about it, you're talking about $100,000 goes, even in today's world, $100,000 goes a long ways fixing a head gate or a ditch that flew out. And if you really need it, then you come to this and we can figure that out. Then you sit down, you don't get sucked in down the rabbit hole that you can't get out of. And I'm a firm believer in that.
Mr. Munger?
So I guess the only thing, and I can't remember seeing it in here, are these all gonna be pre-approved? I mean, gonna have to be, so you weren't, part of our program before was you could go do the project and ask for money back at a later time. So did we address that, or are we gonna leave that silent for now, or?
We removed that projects that are completed, which is, we had a fairly unusual grant program in that it funded completed projects.
Yeah.
It's hard to say that you have an emergency that you need money for.
I agree, so I just want to make sure it was.
So we've removed that component of it, and that was one of the changes.
But then, I mean, I don't know that my emergencies are going to fall in line with the board's timing of March and September. And so I'm gonna have to do something. It's June. I gotta turn water on. And that's what I think the River District should be available for, to help our constituents in a true emergency of that sort. And we have a lot of little ditch companies that don't have access to an instant bank loan or can't cash a bond in or do any other fundraising. They need to get started on a job.
And, we had a very good, grant program, but our problem, which could cover those sorts of things. Our problem right now is, we're heading down on our funding. And I think I view this as a effort to maintain something out there, but without, maintaining, at least at the present time, that, very successful grant program that we had, because we don't have the ability to do that right now. Marty, yes?
What if we just took out the March, and it could come in at any time, and it can come before us at any meeting?
that we
And
know
leave everything else in place.
How about if it were quarterly, so, because it has to come, right now it's set to come up before the first and the third quarterly.
It could be quarterly, or just a reminder, you do meet bi-weekly during part of the year on phone calls, so we could.
Yeah.
You know, and I would only say this, that the way this is written, just the other part of this is that the only things you would consider are not the ones that I deny. The only ones you consider are the ones that are actually being recommended by staff. So you normally in the grant program saw, we're not recommending this, you know, I'm just talking about bringing to you the ones that staff is fully behind, and others, we'll cut them and ferret them out. But, so there are opportunities, at least during legislative session, because I think, you know, Tom's point is a good one. Springtime, there are blowouts. I mean, that's somewhat most likely to occur. Maybe August is another month where the monsoons can cause some issues. But I totally defer to y'all in terms of how you want to.
I mean, to me, it does make sense to have the board approval.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
you can pass the buck that far, I agree.
Yeah.
You don't have to be the.
I really liked your project, but the board didn't approve it yet.
So that makes sense, but I think Marty's suggestion would at least help me get on board with this, to make it more flexible and to be more timely in the case of an emergency.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I think if it's an emergency program, it's gotta be a rolling submission, otherwise it just looks like a mini grant program that we're doing twice a year. The problem, of course, if we only have $50,000 and somebody has a $50,000 emergency in January, then it's gone.
Yeah.
But that sounds to me more like what an emergency is than something that's a twice a year application. And I would even support the executive committee being able to make the call if an emergency came in and the board wasn't meeting for 3 more months.
I have one quick question. How many emergency requests have you had in the last 5 years?
I don't know about the last 5 years, because I've only been here about 18 months, but I'd say.
The last 18
in the
months?
18 months, we probably had 6.
Yeah.
What was the average cost?
Hard to know, because some of them went away as soon as we started asking questions.
Oh,
So,
okay.
you know, but I mean, for instance, Pilot Rock, they were very happy to get 20,000, and they went and borrowed the money and they got, I believe, DK some additional funding. No, just.
As far as I know, they never were successful.
Okay. So they borrowed the rest of it or funded it themselves. You know, and that was a total DK of 50,000 or a little bit less?
more.
A little bit more. Okay. So they complied with the policy of the period of time. But I think I'm happy to take your we can maybe approach this in a couple different ways. One, I could just take your feedback and come back to you in January, or you could pass it with the modification that it become a rolling program, and that I think Director Chandler Henry recommended that in the absence of a regular board meeting, that the executive committee could call a special meeting to consider and approve a grant. That's up to you.
I would concur that we move forward and use that language, that emergency grant, consider emergency grant applications at full board meetings and executive committee meetings. I think it does cover possibilities, and I do think we need to be careful about looking like we've got lots of money to give out, because that's public.
So they come and ask.
Yeah, we don't want the public to think, oh, we're in trouble with revenues, but we've got money to give out.
I get one question. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Chandler Henry. Question I have on that, is it really an emergency for a project for a water use efficiency enhancement project?
No.
I mean, we have a number of items here that really, you know, are nice planning projects, but they're really, I think we need to maybe tighten up what an emergency is.
Well,
And
can I?
And then it's at competitive grants.
Right, and it's a repair or rehabilitation of these programs. So if those structures, it's not the actual creation of that program.
Yep.
But if they have created structures and water usage. And I can remove that one in particular, it doesn't actually make a lot of sense. But the others, I think, are actually structures that we're talking about that have been destroyed.
Well, you know, I think people who are really running water, trying to make a living, they'll do whatever. Doesn't matter if you give them money or not.
They'll just get out there and do it.
They're gonna go borrow the money, they're gonna put up whatever collateral the group of them need or an individual, and they're gonna run water. They're gonna do it, they got it. That's the nature of the game.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to approve this with changes, making it a rolling grant program to be approved at a regular board meeting or an executive committee meeting. Is there any further discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign?
No.
Aye.
Okay, we have going on record, Mr. Trampy and Mr. Catlin are opposed.
Well, thank you, and I want to tell you that the agenda says we'll be done at 4:20, and it is
4:21.
I'm
You missed
really
it.
You're fired.
my computer says 4:20.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, 6:30 or so over at Riviera.
At the Riviera, yeah, and by the way, Chris Treese and his wife Amy will be there, and we are gonna do a little honoring of them.
Not too honorary.
Not